Good. Welcome, everybody. This is the October 4th afternoon session of the Portland City Council. Carla, please call the roll.
Udaly?
Here.
Fritz?
Here.
Fish?
Here.
Saltzman?
Here.
Wheeler?
Here. So I won't read the statement. I think I know it almost by heart. The statement is this: treat people with respect. Expect that when people give testimony at the microphones, they will not all agree with you. If everybody at the microphone agrees with you, you should question what is wrong with all of us. And it's no fun if everybody agrees with you. So just treat people with respect. We don't shout, we don't yell, we don't boo, we don't applause, just thumbs up or thumbs down. Always works with great effect in this chamber. If you are a lobbyist, please state that you are a lobbyist. Council rules require that. If you're here representing an organization, that's also super helpful. If you choose to disrupt the council, you'll be asked not to do so, and if you continue to do so, you'll be asked to leave. And if you're asked to leave and you choose not to leave, you are subject potentially to arrest for trespassing. We don't want it to go there. Let's all just enjoy the time that we have together and express our views together as a community. So with that, colleagues, I'm reshuffling the schedule a little, and I want to run this by you. First of all, I have an absence today at 3:45. I must go, and I cannot get out of that. I just want to forewarn you. I have proposed that we move item 1101 to the front of the agenda. That should take about half an hour-ish. Then I would propose we go back to the items from this morning that we did not get to. There are 3 that we can read together, I believe, to speed that up, and then we'll go back onto the agenda as proposed. Does that work with folks here? Sure. Okay, great.
So, Mayor, just for those who are here for the time certain, that would mean that the 2:05 time certain is likely to come up at 3?
Maybe not that long.
Question about that. The first one is just a second reading vote.
That's correct.
So could we just take care of that one?
Okay,
Probably, hang on. Always enjoy second readings because they go quickly. Which one are you looking at, Commissioner?
1099.
Very good. Good, all right. Do you want to start with 1099?
Take care of it.
Let's do it. 1099, please read 1099.
1099, amend the Central City Plan District to increase height and floor area ratio limits on the United States Postal Service site.
Very good. Colleagues, the purpose of today's session is to make a decision on allowing Prosper Portland to move forward with the early implementation of the height and floor area at the United States Post Office site. Carla, please read the ordinance. You did. The USPS site is one of the most significant redevelopment sites in Portland's Central City. The proposed changes are consistent with the Central City 2035 plan and the 2015 Broadway Corridor Framework Plan. This project will bring approximately 700 units of affordable housing, a high-density mix of employment, new city attractions, including expansion of the park blocks, and signature connections between the Pearl District and Old Town Chinatown, and between the North Park blocks and the Broadway Bridge. Colleagues, any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Udaly?
Aye.
Fritz?
It was impressive how much consensus we had on this, and I'm looking forward to it getting done. Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Thank you for everybody who worked very hard on that. We'll next move to item 1095. I'm sorry, 1101.
Yeah,
I apologize, 1101. Only I'd learned my numbers.
Prohibit transfers of recreational vehicles and with malfunctioning or non-functioning wastewater systems.
Commissioner Saltzman.
Thank you, Mayor. Over the past years, the Portland Bureau of Transportation has seen a significant increase in complaints of derelict abandoned, or malfunctioning recreational vehicles, or RVs, on our city streets. More concerning is the amount of reports we receive from community members, businesses, business owners, and others of the extreme cases of these recreational vehicles, ones that have caught fire due to improper electrical wiring, RVs that leak sewage, gas, or other dangerous liquids onto neighborhood streets. These are a clear public health and safety hazards that need to be addressed. With this action today, we are getting upstream on an issue the city literally spends a significant amount of resources to solve.
Colleagues, 2 weeks,
Whoops.
oh, I'm sorry, Dan, I apologize.
Only on page 1. One of 2.
Settle in.
One of 3. We are making it clear to tow lots, businesses, or any other owners of derelict RVs that by knowingly selling and in some cases giving away RVs with malfunctioning wastewater or fuel systems that will leak onto the city right-of-way, that you are putting the health and safety of those who occupy, live, work, or play near that RV at risk. The city spends significant resources to dispose of the hazardous waste or materials, pick up trash, tow, and recycle these RVs. We also recognize that properly dismantling these RVs can be expensive and a burden on owners. So PBOT, in partnership with Metro, will be hosting an RV turn-in day towards the end of October to provide a way for owners to dispose of these RVs in a responsible way. It will cost the city money, but we believe it's the right and necessary thing to do. We do have invited testimony, and the mayor will introduce those invited panelists in 1 minute here. And I want to thank them for being here today and for their advocacy and support on this issue. And I'd also would like to recognize the work of both PBOT and Portland Police, who have been thoughtful and thorough on their work to address the increased number of derelict, abandoned, or malfunctioning RVs on our streets. And I also want to thank Mayor Wheeler and his staff for their work in partnership with my office to take this step to get upstream on the issue. And I also want to introduce an amendment that is some technical clarifications that I would ask that we move at this time as well. And then I'll turn it over to Mayor Wheeler.
I'll
Is there a
second
second?
the technical amendments.
Very good. Commissioner Saltzman moves the technical amendments. Commissioner Fish seconds the technical amendments. We'll call
Okay.
that Saltzman 1.
And turn it over to Mayor Wheeler.
Very good. Colleagues, 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to tour the facility where we've been storing these derelict and malfunctioning RVs. Beyond the expense of towing these off the street and the cost to the city and the valuable time and resources it consumes, it was apparent, I will say very apparent, as you'll probably see from the presentation today, that these RVs were a public health and safety hazard. These were the extreme of the extreme, with some completely burned out due to electrical issues. The smell of leaking sewage was overwhelming. They were stuffed often with needles and human waste. PBOT and our offices have fielded over 4,000 complaints from concerned residents, and we must respond with a multifaceted approach. This ordinance is an attempt to head off these hazards upstream and discourage individuals or businesses from gifting or selling these derelict, malfunctioning RVs at no or a very low cost. We do understand that this can be costly to owners, and that's why we're pairing this ordinance with an RV disposal turn-in day. It will still cost the city money. However, it will cost significantly less than it costs to have staff assess, tow, and dispose of RVs as we're currently doing. What we are saying is you can't just give these malfunctioning vehicles away. Instead, we are providing an option for turning them in and having them disposed of properly. I would lastly like to highlight the great work and the strides that PBOT, Dave Benson in particular, and the Police Bureau, Sergeant Teague in particular, have had in addressing these RVs. This is a very complicated issue. They've been nimble and incredibly thoughtful in their approach to these complicated scenarios, And it goes without saying, it is very difficult work. Commissioner Saltzman, I want to thank you and your team for your leadership on this issue, and I'm very appreciative of the work that we've had the opportunity to do together. We have 5 invited individuals for invited testimony. I'd like to go ahead and call them up first. We can probably pull 2 more chairs up if people don't mind that. We have Dave Benson from PBOT, Robert King, who's the Assistant Chief of the Portland Police Bureau, Randy Teague, who is a sergeant with the Portland Police Bureau, Jennifer Young, who is the Lentz Neighborhood Association Livability Chair, Corky Collier from the Columbia Corridor Association. Welcome.
There we go. Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. My name is Dave Benson. I'm the Parking Services Group Manager at the Bureau of Transportation. I'm here today to explain the ordinance being introduced by Commissioner Saltzman and Mayor Wheeler. The purpose of this ordinance is to make unlawful the sale, loan, or other transfer of RVs that leak fuels or have leaky wastewater systems, or a reasonable person would conclude that they are in such disrepair that they would be likely to leak. This ordinance was also written with exceptions to it. So an individual can transfer an RV to a repair facility, a licensed dismantler, or to the city of Portland for that matter during the RV turn-in day. My presentation today is designed to share with you the work we have done in recent months with derelict and hazardous RVs so that you understand why we are making this recommendation. You also hear from my colleagues to my left here, Commander Robert King, Sergeant Randy Teague, and community members who are deeply concerned about this issue. We believe that adopting this ordinance is a way to keep dangerous and hazardous RVs off our city streets. In November of 16, City Council provided $150,000 to the Bureau of Transportation for the purposes of dismantling and recycling derelict RVs that qualified as abandoned vehicles, that is, vehicles that aren't operable, have no current registration, have little or no value, and no legal owner claims them when they're towed. We made, and you approved this request because an RV at its end of its life cycle has no value, and the disposal process can cost up to $2,000 for an individual if they are lucky enough to find disposal facilities that will take RVs. Tow companies that scrap cars don't want RVs because they don't have any commercial value. This $150,000 helped us partner with tow companies to tow derelict RVs off the street and dispose of them. At the time, PBOT increased the number of abandoned auto officers from 3 to 4, as well as our efforts on chronic abandoned vehicle cluster locations. To give you some sense of how the issue has exploded, in all of 2016, we had 4,000 abandoned RV cases. To date, 3/4 of the way through the year, during the first 6 months, we had 4,000, or doubling what we had all in 16. And through 3/4 of the way of the year, we've had almost 7,000 abandoned RV reported cases. We are on pace to be close to 10,000 by the end of the year. And this doesn't include the over 20,000 complaints we receive for abandoned cars in the right-of-way each year. In the spring of this year, we began partnering with the Portland Police Bureau on a process that you'll hear later talk more about called the Community Caretaking Procedure. In short, this procedure allows the police to immediately seize RVs that pose an immediate public health threat to health and safety because of leaking raw sewage, flammable fuels, sharps in and around the vehicle, garbage or other waste matter that attracts rodents and creates hazardous condition. These RVs are dangerous to both the public and to those who choose to stay in them. To complement PBOT's, the Portland Police Bureau's efforts, we added an additional 4 abandoned officers for a total of 8 officers. These new 4 officers have formed what we are now calling our vehicle inspection team. They are exclusively dedicated to working on abandoned auto complaints. In addition to working to remove derelict, unoccupied RVs from the roadway, they also engage with persons living in RVs, offering referrals for services. They interact with social service providers, contact neighbors and area businesses to hear their concerns, and work closely with the Portland Police Bureau neighborhood response team officers to look for solutions. They are dedicated to helping people in our community, and during the hottest periods of this summer, they handed out water to persons sheltering in RVs. They also distribute heavy trash bags to occupants of RVs to help them keep the areas around the RVs clean and helping to eliminate some neighborhood livability concerns. Their addition has had a dramatic ability on our ability to respond to these RV complaints. We have reduced wait time by about 88%. As a practical matter, it was a few weeks to respond to abandoned RV complaint. It's now down to a few days. Since May of 2017, the tow yards have been full and unwilling to take additional RVs, and the new community caretaking program was launched. Therefore, all RVs were towed as either abandoned auto or community caretaking to the Portland Police Bureau's property evidence yard at Giles Lake. Each of these RVs shown has its own story and has to be handled differently. Some have drug paraphernalia, including needles and other hazards that need to be abated. Some need to have waste tanks pumped. Some have missing or obliterated vehicle identifications numbers requiring additional investigation. Some have been completely burned, and the Fire Bureau tells us that so far this year, 25 RVs have burned. The handling of the process of RVs is both complex and nuanced depending on the condition, as is the coordination of towing, the lack of which often hamstrings the police. As a result, PBOT has assigned a full-time staff member to ensure all administrative paperwork is in order to move RVs through the demolishing process in a timely manner. We have also assigned our towing coordinator to spend about 50% of his time working with our contract towers to make sure the police get the tows when and where they need it. These are just some of the RVs that we currently have at Giles Lake, and each has a story. The one that's up on the screen right now, I'm told, and Sergeant Tye can probably speak more eloquently about it, but the day before it was towed, this was a trailer. Actually had sides and a roof. And when the police came back to tow it, this is what they found. So each is different. On this trailer, it was still a vehicle, so we have to go through a rather thoughtful process to make sure we can try to identify an owner, offer them the chance to claim it before we can dispose of it. A lot of these RVs are full of garbage, as you see here. This is just one small, it looks like a Class C motorhome, and that is all the garbage that was inside. We have a company that comes out and cleans out all the waste matter, all the sharps, all the garbage from the inside you see on the slide on your right. RVs towed. Since the community caretaking process was put in place in about May of this year, there have been 100 RVs towed under that program. Since November, when you gave us $150,000, we've towed 156 RVs as abandoned. And not too surprisingly, the motorized RVs, because they're derelict, break down on our city streets. So police officers tow them as traffic hazards fairly routinely. And we've towed 43 of those. The outcomes of the RVs towed to the Portland Police Bureau, so far we've taken 72 to the demolisher, 72. The RVs that are remaining out there, we have 96 of them, 64 of which are community caretaking tows, and 32 of which are abandoned RVs or was treated as traffic hazard. I should point out that we have to handle these very, very differently. Community caretaking tows are held on site for 60 days, whereas an abandoned RV can be disposed of in a much shorter time. This has been a costly program. The Portland Police Bureau to date has spent $92,000 in personnel costs. PBOT during last fiscal year spent $126,000. This year, we're projecting somewhere between $1.3 to $1.8 million. Our costs have gone up dramatically, largely because PBOT has 5 full-time personnel, 3 half-time personnel, and an additional 5 staff who spend up to 25% of their time working on this project. And I didn't even count my time. So it is very expensive. We've never engaged in a process like this. We know the costs are high, but we hope with established policies and procedures, we'll be able to get them down. RV recycling is about $1,500 a unit. That includes $500 for towing, $200 to clean it, about $40 to clean out the tank, and about $700 to demolish it. So it is a very expensive process, even for the city.
Could I just ask a question at that point? Where is the money coming from?
We're using our personnel are fully funded, and we're using it out of existing resources.
Thank you.
Revenues, talk a little bit about that. You gave us $150,000 last year. In this year's budget, or actually this year's changes to fees, you added a $9 charge on every vehicle towed. And that brings us about, and that money is dedicated towards RV recycling. So that gives us a little bit of ongoing funding, to your question, Commissioner, or a way to help pay for this cost. Obviously, it's not everything, but it's something. Brings us up to today. We're told, we believe that there are estimated 650 to 750 RVs in the Portland with people living in them. Some of these RVs are leaking sewage or fuel. Derelict RVs are often disposed of at little or no cost through Craigslist and other ad sites. I'd like to show you a couple actual ads. This is over the summer. We had ads, and you can kind of zoom in. I'm sorry, I can't. The one on your right says, free to the first person to remove from our lot. You must take and remove it yourself. This was a tower out in Washington County that was giving these things away because, again, remember, they have no value. The other one, the gentleman was asserting that his mother and father left it to him and that it's ready to be fully remodeled, but it's not in the best shape, and he wants $200 for it.
So just so I'm trying to follow all this, that the proposed ordinance would prohibit the tower from transferring this vehicle to anybody, even at no consideration, correct?
We have limited it to just those vehicles that are either so badly damaged or likely to leak fuels or wastewater.
Right.
But any other kinds of vehicles that are just old, it doesn't prohibit. It's
Okay.
very narrowly tailored.
But if this Chevy Winnebago was leaking, according to the definitions, then this would apply, this would essentially prohibit a towing company in Portland from offering for no consideration someone to come take one of these things, because that would be a transfer,
It makes it unlawful to do so, correct?
whether it's for consideration or not.
Correct.
It's just, that you're taking this problem off my hands, and we go back to that person who's been storing it and saying, you can't do that, you have to,
Correct.
okay.
Here's yet another Craigslist. The one on the right is the same tower in Washington County. He's busy out there trying to give away a trailer. So these actually do happen. We hear rumors every day about businesses giving away RVs to individuals. We hear about, and I think Sergeant Tyke can speak more eloquently about this, about folks going into tow yards and saying, I'd like that one right there. They put it on a tow truck and take it out and dump it somewhere in our right-of-way. And then ultimately, we engage with them and we dispose of it. So it is a big problem, and it's a big problem for the towers, too.
What's the current ordinance in place with regard to sleeping in an RV in a public right-of-way?
You cannot have an RV, the most restrictive reading of it is you cannot have an RV in the right-of-way unless you're actively loading or unloading for more than 8 hours.
And that's been on the books for a long time?
That's been on the books for a long, long time.
Okay, thank you.
The current situation and the impact. Derelict RVs leaking fuels or wastewater are often inhabited and parked on city streets, creating a public safety and health hazard, not only to the public, but the people living in them. So we receive complaints, the police or PBOT tow these vehicles, and the people that receive them are yet displaced yet again. So this process actually harms the homeless by getting these derelict vehicles. This ordinance is just one tool to prevent the most derelict of RVs from being occupied to begin with and being parked in the right-of-way, creating hazardous conditions. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
I have a question, if I could, Mayor. In your presentation, you said there are about 650 to 750 known RVs with people living in them on our streets. Is that
We
correct?
believe that could be correct.
Roughly. So, and in most instances, if I follow what you said, they are illegally, they're where they are parked and the way they're being used is illegal,
Almost always.
almost always. And there's a certain percentage of them that are unsafe to both the occupants and people in the community.
Correct.
So, you know, the last time I was on Hayden Island and visited that spectacular manufactured home community, one of the things I learned is that they have an RV park where people can come, hook up, they at a reasonable cost, you get electricity, water, and then there's a general store. And it turns out that a lot of people who live there are people that work in jobs like they work for the circus or construction projects or whatever. So they do this, they travel around and they just come there, they hook up, and it's a great deal. It's a wonderful location, actually. As a future action, and this may be more directed at the Housing Bureau, are we thinking about ways of creating safe places for people that have high-functioning RVs where they could go at a low cost and plug in and other things, subject to a set of rules and some kind of oversight, so that there's not just this piece, which is important, getting the derelict off, but give people a lawful option where they can take their RV at a low cost and operate it?
Commissioner, it really is an excellent question, and it's really two parts. One, the RVs that we have on our streets, and I think Commander King and Sergeant Tyke can also speak to this, are almost universally in very poor condition.
Okay.
They're not going to hook up to anything. I mean, they don't even have power cords to hook up. They are in horrible shape. As you know, Commissioners, you remember you directed us to provide some dollars to repair RVs. We haven't been very successful because the RVs out there are in such disrepair and are so badly maintained that there's no dollars that could repair them. So to your question, I don't know if there's too many of those out there that would fit that bill.
So just food for thought, and I don't want to, we have a lot on our agenda this afternoon, but it seems to me if we could find a couple locations and in a cost-effective way create something like what they have in Hayden Island, where responsible parties, and let's say even go one step further, maybe find a way to contract with FEMA or some other disaster agency to get some of those low-cost trailers they have, so give someone a temporary use as a transition to us looking for permanent housing and other kinds of things. My guess is we could find some dirt and like some dirt that are close to utility structures, because we're looking for just water, electricity, and sewer. So we could create a set of criteria and look for some dirt. We have a couple of ideas, actually, in one of my bureaus, so that's for another conversation, but that's the carrot, not the stick approach. That's how can we positively address it. And again, the model for me was seeing what happens out in Hayden Island, where it's a very attractive, well-managed thing. Well, could we create a similar environment for people that are otherwise homeless?
Sure. And just to add a little bit to it, and it's a fabulous idea that I think should be explored. But Seattle tried much the same thing, and what they found is these RV parks didn't become transitional, they became an in and of themselves. People saw that as their permanent location, and they abandoned their program. City of Eugene tried the same thing, and they had much the same experience. And although you can still camp in private lots in the city of Eugene, they haven't embraced this idea either. So I think there's been attempts around the nation at this, and I think we should talk to our colleagues in other cities to figure out best practices.
Thank you.
Very good. Commander King?
Mayor and City Commissioners, if you don't mind, I'd like to make my comments at the end. I'd like to introduce Jennifer Young from the Lentz Neighborhood Association. Jennifer has been a tireless advocate on behalf of children and neighbors in our community, especially in Lentz and Brentwood, Darlington, and has been at the table, worked closely with police and community groups for a very long time in a way that's designed to help make people safer. So I'd love very much to hear from her, and then also from Sergeant Tighe, of course, who in the Police Bureau has singularly been our expert in many regards and has helped to develop and implement these programs. And without him and his tireless work, along with, of course, P-Bot and David Benson and Kezia Wanner, we would not be here today. So if you don't mind,
Thank you very
Jennifer?
much for that introduction, and thank you for having me speak today. I feel very privileged. My name is Jennifer Young. I am a over 20-year resident of the Lentz neighborhood. I'm coming to you as a Lentz resident today, not in my role as a LNA board member, I'd like to add, because I've been working on this for much longer than I've been involved with the Lentz Neighborhood Association. I own a small nonprofit social service agency in Lentz as well, and I am a administrator for a reporting site for livability issues. Over 2 years ago, Lentz began to see an influx of motorhomes, trailers, and RVs arrive in the neighborhood. I began documenting these vehicles, maintaining photo archives and spreadsheets with a lot of help, because what we were seeing were very dangerous and derelict RVs. These weren't the kind of RVs that I grew up seeing for recreation. We have, I like to say, hosted over 250 of these derelict RVs by conservative counts over the past 2 years, with, I would say, about 95% being what we would consider derelict or unsafe. Most of these vehicles lack tags, many lack license plates, and often they are from out of state. This makes reporting extremely challenging for residents. Many of the RVs do not run, and it's not uncommon to see RVs acquired from junkyards or traded off Craigslist being towed with tow ropes throughout our neighborhood, narrowly avoiding people and cars. See it pretty frequently. Our parks, schools, and residential areas have often resembled RV graveyards with up to 20 caravans parked along public streets. The streets and sidewalk access often is limited, and some of these RVs have operated as mobile drug houses, fencing operations, and bike chop shops. Large groups of people tend to congregate at them as well. The biohazards associated with the derelict RVs have been a huge issue. We have documented cases of RVs leaking human waste from overfull septic tanks, or occupants actually draining tanks into sewer grates or into the gutter. Sometimes we see buckets poured into the street. The smells are often unbearable, and you can smell them from several feet away. People saying they can smell them inside their houses. It's not unusual to see the sewage flowing when it rains. When we have tried to report, sometimes we're directed to the fire department because it's an immediate, health hazard. Then sometimes we're directed to BDS, and then most of the time back to P-Bot. And P-Bot, as Dave so eloquently explained, is just completely overburdened. They're sort of the point of contact for all of this. And it has taken weeks for tow warnings to be issued, and sometimes weeks or months for tows to be arranged. Many of them simply move or have someone tow them a block or two away, resulting in a big game of whack-a-mole, and we have to start the process all over again. We have seen engines pulled out and left on hoists, dripping oil, gas, transmission fluids, especially near parks and schools. We have had, very recently, in the last couple of months, 2 RVs explode. They were both in the same location, oddly enough, next to the high school. The one in May was supposedly electrical. The other one was from gas. Both of these explosions burned the trees nearby, signs, utilities. Residents in the first incident were left without utilities for 3 days. In the latest incident, power was out for several hours, and it was the hottest night of the year, leaving people unable to cool their homes. Luckily, school was out when these explosions occurred. The occupants were unharmed, but this could have easily been a tragedy. We have documented and smelled RVs storing chemicals and probably, most likely, manufacturing drugs. We've seen dogs being used to guard manufacturing drug RVs, which aren't occupied by people. We have to begin to enforce city ordinances and enact measures which will limit the flow and abundance of these dangerous vehicles to our streets. Just as we ask drivers to have a license, registration, operate safe cars, get a DEQ, display their plates, and ensure and respect parking ordinances, we should expect the same from the operators of these derelict RVs. This is a crisis, and a crisis which is harming the neighborhood, the environment, and the occupants of these, basically what I call death traps. It's not good for anyone, so I urge the council to please adopt this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to just focus more on just kind of extension of what she's talking about, and there's no exaggerations here. I just received a complaint before I walked in here of one that sewer is just pouring out of the bottom of it, and they sent me pictures of it. An additional impact that has not been discussed is the Bureau of Environmental Services is also taking a financial impact on this, where these are leaking into the sewer systems. And I went and got trained by some of the people that work there, and they explained that just to have that initial call, it's $1,000, and it quickly can get up to $5,000 per incident. And so these BES is incurring these expenses currently. And so that's another hit the city's taking on these. And I'd like to talk about one of the things this ordinance is going to stop is the recycling of what we're currently seizing. So if some of these vehicles we're taking, there's drugs in there, there's waste, human waste, there's syringes, there's all kinds of things that are a danger to a person. Historically, these could go to a tow yard, and then that tower could give it back to another unsuspecting person who now is believing they're getting this motorhome. They get this motorhome, they go out, it is full of syringes and bio-waste from some unknown person, and then they are burdened with figuring out what to do with that. And what ends up happening is it gets dumped in the street, and or they live in it, one of the two things. So I know one of the gentlemen has had two he lived in a boat and he lived in a trailer, and they've both exploded because they're in such poor repair. So when we talk about the community caretaking piece, we're talking about the entire community. It's not, pitting neighbors against homeless people, or that's not the characterization at all. It's clearly balancing the community health concerns for all people involved. And we work closely with social services to address what Mr. Fish was talking about. We do currently find places for them if they are capable of going to a location. So the Joint Offices of Homeless Services has paid for application fees we've located families in these, and the removal of the vehicle, the timing of removing of the vehicle, balanced against the community concern, was balanced in their favor, so we didn't take it. And we found them a place to go. And so they can get go to their work and fulfill their daily responsibilities. So there is a balancing act that's happening as far as maintaining a humane piece to this, and then maintaining the community health and safety piece. And probably my unit has inspected roughly 120 of these motorhomes, a little more than that probably, and we've towed about 60. We tow the worst of the worst, and we get social services to every person that's involved if they are occupied. We have a social worker or an outreach worker that we work pretty closely with. I don't think she sleeps, but she works tirelessly to help. And we have a combination of her helping get people in places. We have veteran services, outreach workers that are helping us. And then the other piece of this is oftentimes when we step in to remove these motorhomes, families come forward to offer the people that are living in a place to live, because now the last resort is gone. So sometimes it acts as a catalyst for change. And then there's times that we've worked with transition projects to have beds reserved for those times when there's no place for someone to go. And they've been working very hard to make sure that there is an emergency bed for people that are impacted by this program, the community caretaking program. So we've worked very hard to try to get some balance on the backside of this with the people who are impacted. And the one piece we can't mitigate is they're being victimized by, that's an accurate word, being victimized by someone dumping this hazardous waste dump on them. And they think this is going to be the solution to their problem, and it's the beginning of their problem. And it puts everybody in a bad position. It puts them in a bad position. It puts the officers in a bad position, and we got to put a stop to it from that piece. That's pretty much. I just want to make sure that Mr. Fish knows that we are working and discussing with the Joint Office of Homeless Services about a more efficient way of dealing with these. We've talked about it. We went out and identified a parking lot that had power, had all the services there, but when we start doing a cost analysis, it's prohibitive currently, just mainly because of the disrepair of these motorhomes. It's just keeping them there, it would be so expensive. The local, most of the local RV parks won't take them if they're more than 10 years old, and some will if they're in good repair, but they have to be in good repair. And my team has been successful in going outside the city and finding RV lots that will take people, and we've arranged to have them towed there. And when we can accommodate that, we accommodate that. In some cases, we've gotten family to come out and bring the RVs to their private property. So as long as it's not something that is going to blow up and burn the house down. And Fire Bureau expressed to me some concerns about when you have them lined up, when one goes, you can have a chain reaction that can start passing on to houses, taking out power poles. So that's a serious concern. We've had 25 of them already burned down. That's pretty much the program in a nutshell. We're just utilizing the community caretaking law, which is a state law that enables us to do non-criminal activities to support the safety of the communities, things that are inherent to our mission to protect people. So that's what the community caretaking law does. So there's never a criminal component to this. We don't search these and charge crimes. It is completely and totally for human life and safety.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Commander?
I just wanted to start by saying, Commissioner Fish, it's a pleasure to see you. I haven't seen you since I learned of your cancer diagnosis. Someone very close to me that I love very much is recently receiving treatment. I'm very hopeful for you, for your healing, and for complete recovery. And we'll pray for you and for your health.
Mr. King, thank you. And all I can tell you is I'm grateful to live in a city that has the Knight Cancer Institute.
Yep.
Because it turns out we've got a world-class facility in our backyard, and the care I'm getting is first rate, and I think we're making progress. Thank you very much.
Yep, and that's where my family member is, and we're very grateful that they're there as well.
Thank you, sir.
As you've heard today, this really ultimately is about safety and health and about a way for us, it's an additional tool to use at our discretion to stop this revolving door of putting what really are dangerous RVs back in the hands of people that are trying to find alternatives to housing in a crisis that they're experiencing. It is designed from everyone's point of view to be a humanitarian approach to a difficult situation. And I just wanted to encourage you that we are, all of us in this team, both of city bureaus as well as community members, working together to carefully balance the interests of all of those that are involved. And it's complicated and difficult, but we're working through it in a way that I think is ultimately progressing towards a result that is better than the current condition. And then lastly, I just wanted to say that one of the advantages of the benefits that I have of having worked in the city for the last 27 and a half years is I get to see people do really amazing work. And in PBOT, Commissioner Saltzman, David Benson, and Kezia Wanner have, and through your leadership and support, have led an effort in PBOT to help in the city and with the police bureau and other city bureaus that is unprecedented in my experience. And they're producing results that are having an impact that are positive in our neighborhoods, that are impacting safety and livability in a way that I've never seen before. Randy Teig, as a sergeant at East Precinct, is a nationally recognized expert in all of these matters. And he, in many respects, single-handedly has, through his own initiative and his own drive and his own grit, moved all of these things forward in collaboration with so many different people and organizations. And you heard the testimony that he had today for you about the nature of the challenge and the work that he and his team and NERT have leaned into. And they have delivered very positive results up to this point. I'm extremely proud and respect, admire, and appreciate the work that they have done. And I'm very grateful for Jennifer and so many other people in Lentz and so many other people in Brentwood, Darlington, and so many other community members and families throughout our city who have regularly messaged to us as your representatives that they are sympathetic and they understand that people fall on hard times. And they want us to be, as a city, supportive in every way that we can. But they also want us to do work to ensure the safety of all that are involved, both safety and health. So when we come to you with this, we are coming from the point of view of been at countless and numerous community meetings. We've heard from many other city bureaus. We've heard from representatives of the state of Oregon and the federal government. And there are many, many people who have all been working together to make our neighborhoods and our communities around this issue one notch safer and do it in a way that's humane for all involved. So therefore, I hope that each of you supports this ordinance. Again, it gives us an opportunity to do this work. We will use this tool as an investigative tool, as a deterrent, in a way that is designed to produce the kind of results we've talked about today. Thanks very much for allowing us to testify.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you.
Yeah. That completes the invited testimony.
Commissioner Udaley has a question. Sorry.
I just wanted to thank all of you for being here today and for the presentation. You've addressed nearly all of my concerns, and I just really appreciate the compassion and humanity that you're bringing to the conversation. It's been a long day, so I just want to make sure that I'm not seeing and hearing double. Did you say that we were on track for 10,000 removals or 10,000 derelict
We're on
RVs?
track at the end of the year. I think that the actual number is 9,617 cases of abandoned RVs that will be reported to us. We'll be at 30,000 reports of abandoned vehicles this year.
So that number is, are unique vehicles? It's not 10?
No, some of them are duplicated.
All right.
It's not actual. Some of them have, you might get 3 reports on the same vehicle.
Okay, I mean, that is a little bit comforting, because that would be one derelict RV for every 65 Portland residents if we did have 10,000. And it makes me very concerned that our homeless count might be grossly off. Interesting, okay. And Commissioner Fish, I just wanted to let you know that we've had a conversation, an initial conversation with Director Jolin at Home for Everyone about the possibility of opening up lots, and it is problematic because as has been explained here, if a RV is 10 years old or less or in really good repair, there's typically somewhere for them to go. And then if it's in disrepair, unsafe, obviously we don't want to give it a place to park. And there's not a lot that's in between. It's still something I'm interested in pursuing for those few that might fall into that middle category, but it is problematic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have public testimony on this item, Carla?
I have one person signed up, Scott Pratt.
Scott, come on up. 3 minutes. Name for the record, please. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Scott Pratt. I am not a lobbyist, so I don't have to say that, but I like to. Over my 35 years living in Portland, I have held a number of volunteer public advocacy positions. I think for these purposes, the one that is probably most on point is the 30 years I spent as a board member and part of the
I think your microphone might.
Oregon League of Conservation Voters.
There we go. Okay.
And to me, this is probably the most important part of this problem is the sewage, the gas, the waste, the environmental degradation that is occurring because of derelict RVs. So, and that should be a problem that is not absorbed by the city. It shouldn't be a danger to the public, to the citizens of this city. So I strongly urge you to pass this ordinance, make our city a bit more livable, a bit healthier, and get rid of the dangers that are caused by these derelict RVs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Colleagues, any further questions on the technical amendments? Please call the roll on the
Ma'am, just a quick technical correction on the amendments.
Yes.
They identify in the preceding paragraph that it's to amend sections B and C, but when you look at the amendments themselves, they show as A and B. I just want to clarify for the record that council intends for those to be B and C rather than A and B. So,
Very good. Commissioner Saltzman, any objection?
No.
Very good. Any further discussion on the amendments? Thank you for that clarification. Please call the roll.
Udaly,
Well, thanks again for the presentation, and thank you to Commissioner Saltzman and his office, and Peabody. Aye.
Fritz,
I appreciate the technical amendments, Commissioner Saltzman. Aye.
Fish.
I want to compliment everybody on the presentation because I learned a lot, and I want to thank our friend from Lentz from coming. I took copious notes as you spoke, and I thought you gave really helpful testimony, and thank you for doing that. And Commissioner Saltzman, you've already been singled out for some praise in pulling all this together, and I've served with Dan for 9 years, and one thing I've come to appreciate is that if you give him a tough, intractable problem, he will usually find a way to solve it. And that's part of his brand on this council, and that's one of the things that I will miss when he finally ends a distinguished career. Aye.
Saltzman.
Well, I want to thank a lot of people here. I want to start out by thanking the Bureau of Transportation, Dave Benson, Kezia Warner, Mark Williams in particular for your leadership in making this happen, and also Portland Police Bureau, Sergeant Tighe and Commander King. I don't think this would all happen without the two bureaus joining together to make it so. And especially want to thank Jennifer Young for inviting us to the Lentz Neighborhood Livability meeting in April, because that's really that was a catalyst for me. I got angry at what I saw and what I saw Lentz neighborhood dealing with every day, and I felt it was time to deliver on some things. And so what we've done today, I think, is to show that we have a program that works, and this is going to make it even work better by prohibiting the sale of vehicles that have failing waste systems or other threats to residents of our city. And I also want to thank Mayor Wheeler for his leadership in directing the Police Bureau to make this all happen too. And this is really a great place we're at, and I hope we're not inundated with more RVs than we already have, because the numbers are astounding. It's just hard to believe there's thousands of abandoned RVs out there, but there are. So thank you to everybody for making this program happen. Aye. Oh, I also want to thank, forgot to thank my staff, always important. Tia Williams, Matt Grum, and Shannon Callahan, formerly of my staff, all had a hand in making this happen too. Aye.
Wheeler.
So this is a great policy. And as with everything we're doing regarding homeless populations in our community, it is a thoughtful balance. On one hand, as you heard from the people giving testimony, we are seeking a compassionate approach to a humanitarian crisis. On the other hand, as we heard loudly and clearly in Lentz, we also are expected by the public we serve to uphold environmental, public safety, and public health standards. And I think everybody engaged in this process struck a very thoughtful balance. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say is thank you to those of you who testified today. I thought that was very compelling testimony, and I thought it nicely covered both of those aspects, the compassion on one hand, the community standards and the law on the other. And I want to commend Commissioner Saltzman. I think one of the best decisions I've made as mayor was to make him Transportation Commissioner. And I think he's been very responsive to a number of very complicated issues. It's hard to believe. It is October. Pretty soon, Dan, we're going to be talking about ice and snow on the streets again. Yeah. And then after that, potholes again. And then we'll get back to more of these issues. But I believe that in every case, you and your team have risen to the occasion brilliantly. The second thing, I'm joking, is like the 10th thing. The next thing I want to just say is this is not a Portland-only problem. And I have to keep coming back to this because it occurs to me as I listen to people and I go out and I meet with people in the community, there's a sense of hopelessness insofar as people think this is a Portland-only problem. I want to assure you that it is not. This issue with regard to RVs is all up and down the West Coast. And my suspicion, Commander King and Sergeant Teig, is that you're going to be getting lots and lots of calls, if you're not already, from other jurisdictions asking you how you are doing this. And I encourage us to continue to work with all those jurisdictions across the West Coast to address this issue in both a thoughtful, effective, as well as a compassionate way. I want to thank the folks on my staff, as always. If I ever look like an idiot, that's all me. If I ever look like I'm doing something good, you can bet that Seraphy, Burke, and Andrea are behind it as they were on this. So thank you for that. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted as amended. I'm sorry, that's the amendment. I'm getting ahead of myself. The amendment. Now to the main motion. Please call the roll unless there's any further questions, colleagues. Commissioner Udaley. Call the roll, please.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Well, thanks to everybody who's already been mentioned, particularly Commissioner Saltzman, and also to the Lents Neighbourhood Association, Jennifer Young, amazing work that you've been doing, but also in partnership with Judy Law and Cora Potter and so many folks who've been working in Lents for a very long time. And I agree with Commissioner Saltzman that the hearing we had, or the town hall that we had in Lents, was extremely compelling. So now we'll get the RVs taken care of. We've got the nice new soccer field. We've got the playground fixed. So we'll have to decide together what's the next thing to challenge to go. But it's really great to see good things happening in Lents. Did I hear correctly, Assistant Chief King?
I was the acting assistant chief.
Acting Assistant Chief. Well, I like.
He did a great job.
I thought it sounded very good. So thank you for your long-standing work with the Police Bureau and obviously with the partnerships that you've formed here. And thank you to Janine on my staff, and especially to Matt Grum on Commissioner Saltzman, who always gets back to us very quickly. Aye.
Fish?
If you were the acting assistant chief, did that mean we saw you on Grimm?
No, I never did make an agreement.
All right, well, your loss. Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The ordinance is adopted as amended. Thank you, everybody, for that. Please call 95, 96, and 97 together.
1095, create Rental Services Commission. 1096, appoint 13 members to the Rental Services Commission. And 1097, appoint 5 new members and reappoint 7 members to the Portland Housing Advisory Commission.
Colleagues, housing and tenants' rights have been a top priority for me, and I know for all of you. Meaningful public engagement has been a key part of our approach as we implement our strategic vision around housing access and affordability. To maintain transparency of and enable community feedback on the city's increasing role in tenant-landlord affairs, we needed to create a setting for the public to discuss these regulations and for a body to advise the city on these regulations. Therefore, we went through 2 different recruitment processes to rejuvenate our PHAC, our Portland Housing Advisory Commission, Portland Housing Bureau's BAC, which is our Budget Advisory Commission, and to institutionalize a new advisory body, the Rental Services Commission, or, of course, the RSC. I think we need to pass a subsidiary ordinance about acronyms. This new advisory commission, the Rental Services Commission, will advise the Housing Bureau Director, the Housing Commissioner, and the City Council on issues of rental housing law and regulations, landlord-tenant programs and services, and provide a forum for public input on rental housing. Along with the creation of this commission, we're making 13 initial appointments to this body, reinvigorating our Portland Housing Advisory Commission with 5 new members and reappointment of 7 sitting members. Both PHAC and the RSC, eventual advisory body to the Office of Rental Services, will provide a sounding board on the Portland housing policy issues. Today we have an invited panel. We have Director Kurt Krieger coming up first, and at the conclusion of his presentation, we'll have one more panel of invited testimony. Director Krieger, take it away.
Thank you very much. Members of City Council, Mayor Wheeler, Kurt Krieger, your Director of Housing. This is an opportunity for a base clearing home run. After a long morning of policy, we are bringing forward, as you indicate, a new commission, a Rental Services Commission. I think it's important that you recognize that the technical advisory group that is currently charged with dealing with the necessary policy improvements to the mandatory rental assistance, relocation assistance, will continue its work. We're not going to burden this new group with that assignment. We already have a group that's impaneled. They will finish their work and will report to council as directed by Mayor Wheeler. The Bureau has been onboarding with the GeoBond Oversight Committee, and so we will use the first meeting to make sure that everyone is properly onboarded and that they will take up their charge appropriately. So 2 steps: Ordinance 1095, creating the commission; Ordinance 1096, appointing members to the commission. I'm sensitive to the discussion this morning about balance. And while we did not screen people for their tenancy and their tenure, we did look specifically at people who were sympathetic to renter concerns. And I'm confident in saying that over half, 7 of the 13 members, or 54%, are sympathetic to renter concerns. Many are renter advocates or legal service advocates, although they themselves may own a home. And then with Ian Davey representing Home Forward, a social landlord, our largest social landlord, one could reason, although that they have landlord responsibilities as well as tenant responsibilities, that we have a good solid representation and a well-balanced group here. I know you've gotten comments about expanding the group or maybe different appointments. I would urge you to consider that if you make any different appointments, that you also expand the size of the group from 13 to 15. Because this was a carefully constructed group, and swapping one person out, I think, could upset that balance. Be happy to respond to any questions you might have about those 2 items. Would you like me to speak to the PIAC as well?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Great. I'd be happy to. I would like to point out that our good friend and colleague Ed McNamara's name is misspelled. It's McNamara. We have returning members: Sarah Zahn, Dyke Dame, Elisa Harrigan, Amy Anderson, Betty Dominguez, Maxine Fitzpatrick, and Nate McCoy. I would underscore the fact that the executive committee consists of Sarah, Dyke, and Elisa, so they're well-valued, long-standing members. And then we're reinvigorating the group with Cameron Harrington, as you probably know from Living Cully, Ramsey Waite, who has been very active throughout the region throughout his entire career and was, I think, in City Hall with Mayor Bud Clark many years ago. Hannah Holloway, Diane Lynn, and Ed McNamara. So we're very pleased that Portlanders are willing to step up and give so generously of their time and their talent. I report to the PHAC itself and will be happy to meet with them at their upcoming meeting.
Very good, Director Krieger. And colleagues, I just received a note. We had an invited panel. As you can see, the individuals on the invited panel were also in the chamber this morning for the better part of 4 hours on a different item. They all have jobs that they need to attend to, so it's my understanding none of them are still here. Deborah MC, Katrina Holland, Elisa Harrigan, or Margot Black, or any of them present and would like to testify. We had one gentleman this morning who is actually being appointed to the Rental Services Commission. We allowed him to testify this morning. He couldn't be here this afternoon. There are other members from the commission, who would like to have the opportunity to come on up. Please do so. Director Krieger, you can cool your heels. Sorry, Commissioner Fritz.
I just had a quick question for Director Krieger. The code section doesn't say anything about term limits. We're about to discuss that in the next item, so I'm assuming that it can be amended or...
Indeed. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Hello, I'm Christian Bryant. I'm officially, I own my own management company. I'm a property manager and president of the Portland Area Rental Owners Association, as well as the Northwest Real Estate Investor Association. With that said, I also do a lot of continuing education for landlords, and I'm a firm believer in the best way to be a profitable landlord is to be one that, treats your tenants like people and, respects their rights and makes sure that they feel at home. So, I have the professional hat, also happen to be a tenant myself. I'm the second tenant that was referred to on the oversight committee for the relocation ordinance. So I also feel like, when we have these kind of issues that divides two groups that are need to have a symbiotic relationship, then we definitely need to approach this in a way that is fair for all those involved. We can't deny that there's a housing issue, and we need to make sure that we do try to create fixes that will solve the problem for the long run as well as the short run. So I appreciate being invited to be on the commission.
Thank you, and we appreciate your willingness to serve. Thank you so much. Colleagues, any further questions before I open the door for public testimony? Commissioner Daly?
Mr. Bryant, thank you for your willingness to serve, and congratulations on being appointed. And I'm going to resist asking you why you're a renter, which is a question that many of us
I have a
receive.
great answer.
Yeah, I mean, given your...
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question is,
Why am I a renter?
why are you a renter, given the field that you're in, and, yeah.
Absolutely fair. So I am a renter because I run my own business, actually two, because I have a public speaking, continuing education business where I go around the state and the nation and do that. Also running two nonprofit associations, and I'm a single dad of 8 and 5-year-old boys. So I don't have time to fix things. I don't have time to mow the lawn. I will happily pay more than what I would pay if I owned the place, just to know that no matter what, I can focus on all the stuff going on, keeping it organized, and whatever I need is one phone call away if there's a real problem, and I don't have to take that responsibility.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Commissioner Fish had to leave momentarily. He passed me a note. He wanted to know, what do you do in your spare time? Just kidding.
I do
Just
absolutely
kidding.
nothing. When I have spare time, I love my couch. No, actually, I do a lot of hiking, except for when there's nowhere that's not smoky or on fire.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you for your service. Is there anybody else here who's on one of the, is an appointee who'd like to speak? Very good. Any public testimony on any of these items?
No one signed up on any.
All right, very good. 1095, please call the roll.
Udaly.
Well, first, I want to thank Mayor Wheeler for following through on the promises he made to create an office specifically to manage renter issues in Portland. This is a really important step toward even greater service support and protections for tenants as well as landlords. Starting a new office is a huge undertaking, and I'm proud to work alongside other council members and a mayor who gets how important these issues are to individuals, households, and families in Portland. We know that we have a supply problem, and we are working on it, but more than that, we have a stability problem. We have a lack of rules, former lack of rules that help mitigate conflicts between two parties who are engaged in one of the most critical types of contracts, which is leases and rental agreements. The agreements made and the expectations set between owners and renters have devastating consequences when not done properly and when one side has very little power and the other holds most of it. My office will not relent on making sure that renter protections remain a top priority for this council until or unless such time as we see all Portland renters in safe and stable housing. Thank you very much to the organizations and the individuals who have stepped up to dedicate their time to serving on the Rental Services Commission and the Portland Housing Advisory Commission. I look forward to working with you. I vote aye.
Fritz.
When Mayor Wheeler told me that he was going to form this commission, I was a little taken aback because we hadn't actually got the office yet, and I was wondering who was going to staff it and all that. The more I thought about it, Mayor, the more I really appreciate you bringing the community in before we've got all those details worked out so that they can help advise on how to set up the office. And I also appreciate Director Krieger assuring us that he's going to be able to manage it, at least for this fiscal year, within its current budget. So I'm very enthusiastic about this. Aye.
Saltzman?
Well, I want to thank Mayor Wheeler also for setting up this Rental Services Commission. It looks like an outstanding group of individuals, and I'm sure we'll benefit from their advice. Aye.
Wheeler?
Good work, everybody. Aye. The ordinance is adopted. I'll entertain a motion on 1096.
So moved. Or second.
Commissioner Saltzman moves, Commissioner Fritz seconds. Any further discussion on 1096? Please call the roll.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
So this is to appoint those 13 members. Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye, the appointments are approved. Congratulations to everybody on the Rental Services Commission. We look forward to amazing things from you in the weeks, months, and years ahead, and know that you have very willing partners here on the Portland City Council. I'll entertain a motion on 1097 to appoint 5 new members and reappoint 7 members to the Portland Housing Advisory Commission.
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Saltzman moves, Commissioner Fritz seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll, Carla.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
There's some really amazing people who have agreed at your invitation to step up on this. Cameron Harrington, who's an anti-displacement coordinator of Living Cully. Ramsey White, I had to call him out. He was Chief of Staff to City Commissioner Gretchen Kafori. And I'm sure she's looking down on us and so happy that housing is getting such great attention under Mayor Wheeler and Commissioner Udaley and myself and Commissioner Saltzman. We are all very dedicated to make, and Nick as well, but he's not here. So I wasn't, yeah. Thank you, Mayor. So there's like Diane Lynn, who was in charge of the Office of Neighbourhood Involvement, and Multnomah County Chair, Ed McNamara, who worked with various mayors and has just done some wonderful low-income housing. So I just appreciate everybody who's being appointed. Aye.
Saltzman?
Yes, these are outstanding appointees, and they join a group of people who are already very dedicated to Portland housing issues, who are currently serving on the Portland Housing Advisory Committee. Please to support their addition. Aye.
Wheeler?
I want to thank everybody who is stepping up to serve. Aye. The report's accepted and the appointments are approved. Next item is 1098, please.
Authorize an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Gresham for $749,573 for the Home Investment Partnership Program.
Director Krieger.
Kurt Krieger, Director of Housing. The Portland Housing Bureau is the recipient of federal home and CDBG funds, and then we distribute them to our partners in the region, including the City of Gresham. So this $749,573 is a pass-through. We are responsible for compliance. We work cooperatively with Gresham staff to ensure that the projects are executed according to federal rules, and then we have a fiduciary responsibility to report back to HUD. So this is an ongoing relationship that we have with Gresham as well as with Multnomah County.
Very good, Director. Any questions, colleagues? Is there any public testimony on this item?
No one signed up.
Very good. Call the roll, please.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Well, hooray, we're still getting $750,000 from the federal government that is being shared with the City of Gresham. Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Thank you. And next item is 1100.
Enhance community service opportunities and strengthen the transparency and accountability of city advisory bodies.
And I'm sorry, I'm not sure who opens with this.
I'll open.
Commissioner Fish, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and colleagues. Welcome people who are still here after a long day. I am very pleased to co-sponsor this resolution with my colleagues Chloe Udaley and Amanda Fritz. Here's the run of show. I'll provide a few opening comments, and then other members of the council will make opening comments. We will then place proposed amendments on the table for your consideration. We have an invited panel, and then we'll take testimony. We'll break for dinner. We'll come back and have a further discussion. We'll break and then pick it up at breakfast. No, but that's the run of show, and we're losing the mayor at 3:45. So I will curb the humor and try to get to the meat of this. The premise of today's proposed action is that we make better decisions when we partner with the community, and that the city needs to do a better job of providing volunteers who serve on advisory boards and commissions with the tools they need to be successful. In May, Council directed the City Attorney's Office to develop a package of updates to standardize our policies and procedures and to clarify the expectations of all involved, city staff, community members, and decision makers. Today, we are forwarding that package of reforms and updates to the Council for consideration. Like many others, I became interested in this issue after learning that we did not have clear standards governing public service on advisory bodies, nor did we consistently require disclosures of conflicts of interest as a condition of service. The package of proposed reforms and updates before you today was developed by the City Attorney's Office in consultation with the Office of Neighborhood Involvement, the Office of Equity and Human Rights, individual council officers and commissioners, city staff, and of course, members of the public. The goal in establishing citywide standards is fourfold. First, to advance meaningful public involvement. Second, to provide consistency and clarity on the role of advisory bodies. Third, to daylight conflicts of interest. And four, to give community members greater confidence in the value of their service. We have before us for your consideration today the following: a uniform application which includes a conflict of interest disclosure form, training materials for both advisory board members and staff, options to track the delivery of that training, a template for standard bylaws, an exit survey to be completed by members at the end of their service, and values to guide our selection process. Colleagues, I want to preview for you one of my amendments we will be considering today. The original draft of the bylaws, as filed, contained a restriction on members' abilities to speak freely with the media. This language was not something that any of the sponsors discussed, much less agreed to. So my first amendment, emphasis on the pun, will remove the restrictive language while highlighting the need for transparency in the deliberation of the various advisory bodies. With that, I'd like to invite my co-sponsors and other members of the council to make opening comments, after which, Mayor, I will try to organize an orderly process for putting amendments on the table, and then we'll invite our first panel to come forward. So, colleagues? Commissioner.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Fish. So shortly after taking office, my staff was approached by a number of constituents about ideas they felt could help the city be more effective. One of those ideas was asking if the Office of Neighborhood Involvement could somehow provide more direction and guidance to all of the bureaus in how they engage, recruit, and manage advisory bodies. The concerns ranged from the fact that, or at least the perception that the same few people were being tapped over and over again to serve on multiple bodies, to what happens to the work product volunteers put so much time, energy, and expertise into creating. I am pleased to say that this ordinance today is part one of addressing those issues. Today, we are setting the stage for a more cohesive, collaborative vision of how public engagement with the city via boards and commissions will work moving forward. By standardizing our systems across all bureaus, we're making sure that every volunteer who chooses to spend their time and expertise with the city will know what to expect, understand their responsibilities, and ensure that we are all following the law. But we still have more work to do. After the stage is set today, my staff, in partnership with staff from Commissioner Fritz's office, as well as ONI, will begin the important work of creating best practices guidelines for recruitment and retention. I'm looking forward to seeing those proposals come before council sometime in the spring. I also look forward to hearing from our staff as well as public testimony about the work done so far. And now Commissioner Fritz would like to say a few words.
Thank you, colleagues. I'm really excited about this. I was, as many people know, on the Planning Commission back when it was called the Planning Commission, and I was on it for 7 years. So I've had lots of thinking about this over the past, however many years it is, a lot. I was also engaged in the 2011 Charter Review Commission, and I'd asked Brian Hoop, who's formerly with the Office of Neighbourhood Associations. It does not surprise me at all that you are here today to follow this through, now that we're at the Office of Neighbourhood Involvement. So Brian Hoop put together a kind of a survey to find out who was serving on our boards and commissions so that we could appoint a charter commission from these members. And it turned out that there were significant disparities in who was serving on the commissions and committees and the general demographics of the population. So that was really when I started looking at not only that, but with the Office of Equity and Human Rights being formed, how can we invite more people to be engaged in this? Because I found it a wonderful experience being on the Planning Commission. Totally overwhelmed to start off with. Would have loved some of these trainings and onboarding and all the things that we're now putting into place. And I learned a lot, and I felt I had a voice. I knew I wasn't making the decisions, but I was having a voice in recommending to the Commission, to the Council. So I'm very, very excited about this process. It does many things. One of it provides clarity. It also provides training. As Commissioner Udaley said, it specifies very clearly what the legal requirements are and what the aspirational values are as well. Commissioner Fish provided the amendment taking out the language on talking to the media. I support taking that language out, and I learned to my detriment that talking to the media before I talked to any of my colleagues on the Planning Commission was probably not a good thing to do, because it didn't help us really discuss things in an open and transparent way. I'm very concerned that some boards and commissions currently don't have any term limits. And over the time that I've been on the council the last 9 years, I've had many opportunities to appoint or reappoint. I also had the duty, which was not quite so pleasant, of informing people who had been on a committee within Parks for the past 20 years that I thought it would be good to have some new people around the table. And so we need to make more room for people at the table, because there are lots of people who want to step up and help our communities, and that's what we're aiming to do, one of the things we're aiming to do right now.
Commissioner Fish.
So thank you very much. And I want to second what Commissioner Fritz just said. We're not going to prescribe what people can do in terms of talking to the media, but we hope in the selection process and in the training and in the spirit of what we're trying to achieve here that people understand that having discussions at the table with colleagues is usually more fruitful than going around that process prematurely. Doesn't restrict anyone's right to talk to the media at any time on any subject. But it's certainly not our intent to regulate that. But our goal is to create a set of protocols that actually enhance the value of people's public service. And that's what this first step attempts to do. I believe there are a total of 5 amendments which will be offered. Mayor, my suggestion is each one be placed on the table and seconded so that we can get public testimony. And I'd like to begin with Commissioner Udaley.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Fish. So I have slightly updated language to this amendment.
Okay.
It is add to Exhibit D, bylaws template, Section V, general operating procedures, a bullet after the first bullet that states, when the conflict of interest could result in a direct financial benefit to themselves or relatives as defined in state law, a public official shall refrain from voting on the issue, although discussion and participation is still allowed.
So that is Udaley 1, Mayor, and I think the shorthand way of looking at that is a proposal for recusal. So thank you very much, colleague.
Yes. And I second for the purpose of discussion.
Okay, so Commissioner Udaley moves, Commissioner Fritz seconds.
Commissioner Fritz.
I think I've just handed away all my copies of what I was talking about.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. So Earlier, we're talking about minority reports, and I think it's very important, I know it's very important to the council that we do hear minority opinions. We don't expect our boards and commissions to come to complete consensus, and it's very helpful to us to hear what the discussion was and what the different sides, or many sides, might agree. So I'm moving to add the following language to the resolution. Whereas the City Council seeks to understand not only the conclusions of the body, but also the substance of its deliberations, and for that reason encourages the submission of minority reports along with the majority recommendation. And then there'll be a training slide that we'll see that the City Council is interested not only basically what I just said, we're putting that into a training session, and members are encouraged to develop and submit minority reports if the advisory body does not reach a consensus recommendation.
So, Mayor, I will second that amendment. That's Fritz number 1, and it addresses minority reports. Commissioner Fritz.
I don't think I have another one, do I?
Okay, so that brings it back to me. And I should note, before I offer my amendments, that we have received a letter for the League of Women Voters of Portland, which I've circulated to my colleagues. And in the letter, they address, among other things, term limits and the recusal proposal. So that will be made part of the record. I have 3 amendments. The first is Fish 1, which deletes the following language from Exhibit D, Bylaws Template, Section X, Communications, and it is the second, third, and fourth bullet points which impose restrictions on the right of members to talk to the media. And Dan seconds that, thank you. And so that is Fish 1.
No, I'm sorry. Sorry, I apologize. Did we get one of these?
We've got that already.
That we'll call Fish 1, and perhaps as a tip of the hat to Jim Redden, we'll call that the reversal of the so-called gag order in the bylaws. Fish 2, so I have 2 other amendments which I'm going to offer a tip of the hat to Tracy Prince, who, in fairness, while there's a lot of people in this room who care passionately about these issues, Tracy's passion has been boundless. And we got an email from her outlining concerns she had with the legislation. So I have prepared 2 amendments for the council's consideration, which are designed to address concerns that she's raised. I am not offering them as Tracy's amendments because she is free to tell me that I got it wrong or to seek to enhance them, but I want to have them on the table for consideration. So Fish Amendment 2, add to Exhibit D, Bylaws Template, Section 5, Roman numeral 5, General Operating Procedures, comma. This is the bullet after the last bullet that states, quote, staff are obligated to keep a record of all conflicts of interest that are announced during each meeting. So I offer that as Fish Amendment 2.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Fish and Fritz.
Okay.
That's Fish number 2.
And Fish 2, we'll just call a conflict record keeping. I have one additional amendment, which we'll call Fish 3. Add to Exhibit D, Bylaws Template, Section 5, General Operating Procedures, bullet after the last bullet states as follows, quote, if it is found that a member did not disclose a conflict of interest, staff must alert the Bureau Director of that instance. I offer that as Fish Amendment 3.
Second.
Commissioner Fish moves, Commissioner Fritz seconds. Fish number 3.
Colleagues, are there any other amendments that you wish to offer at this time? So, Mayor, may I
I'm going to
continue?
be later offering an amendment on Commissioner Daly's amendment.
Okay, so at this point, it's my great honor to invite our first panel. If you would please come forward. Judy Prosper from the Office of the City Attorney, Ashley Horn from the Office of Neighborhood Involvement, and Kofi Desu from the Office of Equity and Human Rights. And I would like to take a moment as the 3 of you get settled to especially thank Judy Prosper for her work on this project over the past year. She is quite literally the driving force behind this proposal at the staff level. and we would not be here today without her outstanding work. So Judy, thank you for your service. And with that, I will recognize Judy Prosper.
My apologies, first and foremost. I think I'm far enough away from all of you that no one will get sick, and I'm sorry to my colleagues here. Just came down with something awful. Thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon to you, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. As you stated, I'm Judy Prosper, one of the Deputy City Attorneys here. A little bit of background how I became involved in this project. Early in my tenure with the city, I was working with a newly formed board, and various issues arose. We started trying to tackle each issue as it came up, and that seemed like an impossible task. So two things jumped out at me. One was that members of the advisory boards did not know of their status as public officials, nor the obligations and responsibilities that flowed from that. And the second was that no one told them. So, needing to resolve some of the issues that came up, I culled the existing work of colleagues, looked through relevant law, and put together a 50-slide training that was delivered via PowerPoint. It is in your packets. I have it loaded. In case there are questions later, I can pull a slide here and there to respond to those. The training is offered on an as-needed basis, as folks request it. Myself or one of my colleagues will deliver it to new boards, existing boards, or whatever's requested. The crux of it was to introduce the pillars of being a public official, and again, the obligations. I have a slide, and how do I get this, a slide? Mm-hmm. Just kind of click this here. You don't have to see me. Sorry, this is really hot. Perfect. Yeah, and then it'll just like, it'll pop up. Thank you. I just want to make a quick note, because when we had some focus groups of staff members, and some issues came up that we want to just put forth, and that is to distinguish appeals boards, boards that make final decisions, and any board created by charter from advisory boards, which we're here to discuss today, advisory boards that are created by council, by code, or by a bureau. Appeals boards do make final decisions, even if their decision can be appealed to a higher authority. Boards like FPDR, who make final decisions, and any board created by charter, including FPDR, is not the subject of our work here today. They're not advisory in the sense that I described.
And Judy, can I just jump in?
Please.
It's very important you make that distinction, because we have heard from some interest groups that were concerned about the impact of what we're doing on, say, confidentiality agreements that they enter into as a part of being a deliberative body and receiving information. Maybe it's police accountability work or other kinds of things. And so there are a different body of laws and rules that apply to bodies that make final decisions or have a higher level of decision-making. We are talking purely about advisory boards that serve at the discretion of the council, and therefore it's a different standard.
Exactly so. Okay, so the three basic pillars of being a public official, there they are. Well, the three basic pillars of membership in a body, and they are being a public official, whether you're sitting in a public or private meeting, and whether you're to keep public records. I'll go. So my recommendation, of course, and this is part of the plan, is that all staff, all members of advisory boards should receive this training in one form or another. There'll be additions based on what is decided here today, and then an additional training for bureau liaisons in addition to what the volunteers receive with information on how to help them effectively staff those boards. So this next slide, through our work, we've decided, or it sort of shook out when we did an inventory of all the advisory bodies that came back from the May inventory. There are really three types of advisory bodies. The bona fide governing body of a public body, that's a collective cull of ideas to advise this body, a public body council, by a designated group of individuals and is ongoing. The second type is a little bit of a deviation from that, and that are those limited boards that are pop-ups for a specific reason. They're still advising council, but they have a limited duration and they're issue specific. The third, pardon me, the third type of board is a little bit different. It's before bringing an idea to council or implementing it at the bureau level, staff, city staff, are to gather input from a variety of stakeholders or designated constituencies, and then the staff members incorporate those ideas into a final product or proposal. City staff members are the ones doing the work. What distinguishes 1 and 2 from 3 is that 1 and 2 bodies come directly to council. And as an example, if staff disagree with what the body has come up with, the body can come straight to council and give their input and conclusions and such based on their votes at their meetings. A type 3 board is a board that is advising a person who works for the city. That is one of you, a bureau director, anyone inside a bureau who's managing a project. And the person responsible for the work product is the staff member. So that's sort of a distinction, and maybe we'll get to that later if you have questions. And just to point out here, there are also alternate means, rather than putting together a type 1, 2, or 3 board, to gather community input. You can have a town hall, or you can simply have a meeting in your office of various folks who you want to give input on a topic. One other key distinction between ones and twos together and threes is that quorums and votes are not required in the third, in type threes. And you can use other means. I've heard of taking the temperature of the room by using red, yellow, and green flags, by having a show of hands, or how many people kind of feel this way. When you're in a 1 or 2, a board that advises council, you have to use the quorum rules per state law, and your votes are going to need to be tallied. Okay, disclosure. Oregon state law considers appointees to city advisory bodies public officials and requires disclosures of conflicts of interest. Members of all 3 categories of advisory bodies are public officials. Under Oregon Revised Statute 244-020-3, a person has a conflict of interest when participating in an official action, a vote, which is potentially, or would actually result in a financial benefit or avoidance of detriment to the public official, a relative of the public official, or a business with which that person is associated. Additionally, Portland City Code Chapter 1.03, our code of ethics here, requires advisory members to uphold a specific standard of behavior. The language is included as part of the application form, which someone will speak to later, advising volunteers from the beginning when they're coming in to volunteer and sign up to get on a board or ask to be selected for a board. They have that information. So some definitions from this slide. So Oregon state ethics law defines business with which a person is associated as when during a preceding calendar year, the person is a director, officer, owner, employee of a private or closely held corporation and has $1,000 worth of stock. Or when during the preceding calendar year, a person owns $100,000 worth of stock in a publicly held corporation. And it, not only the person, but an appointee or relative is a director of a publicly held corporation. And then again, when an appointee is required to file an annual verified statement. The definition of, excuse me, relative is very vast. Your spouse, your children, the children of your spouse, that is your steps, your siblings, your in-laws, spouses of sibling, that's in-laws, parents of your spouse, your in-laws the other way, and anyone basically who provides financial support to a member of your household. This is the state law definition of who a relative is. Again, these last two bullets are for, I know the text is going over it, but the last two bullets are basically for households of unmarried people, but who provide support to each other. State law counts the monies and the interests as relatives. Excuse me.
Could I ask you a question on that? Hopefully it'll give your
Sure.
poor voice an opportunity to recover a bit.
you.
Thank you for being here. I have often wondered, is the standard here a conflict of interest would be if a sibling had a direct interest in a company and you were making a decision about it? That is technically a conflict of interest, correct?
Yes, yes.
So
And you're
here's
making
where
a
it gets
decision.
weird. So bear with me. Is it the obligation of the person on the body to disclose known conflicts of interest, or is it to disclose those conflicts of interest? And the reason I ask, and I'm not personalizing this to anybody anywhere near this room, but what if you are estranged from your sibling and you have no idea what their financial interests are? How does that work?
That's a very interesting question. The way I read the statute, it is meant, sort of those folks that you can reach out and touch that are in your realm. I actually don't have an answer to an estranged relative on the list, how that would count. I don't want to guess what the OGC would do, but I think logic would have to sort of prevail in that situation if someone were to bring a claim against someone before the OGC. I would hope that the OGC would use logic in that case.
Very good.
When they were thinking of a penalty.
But you can't disclose what you don't know.
Correct.
So at that point, I suppose if a strange person comes and says, by the way, I own that property, at that point, you would have to say, I just found out my estranged sister owns this.
I don't want to sound like the lawyer here, but I'm
Well.
guessing the Ethics Commission would say something like, what reasonable steps did you take to learn? There's no ostrich defense. And I'm guessing that there's a lot of estranged sibling who served on closely held boards of closely held companies, so you know about that. But the other things, I think, is probably a subject of a reasonable inquiry standard, my guess. Again, I'm not a practicing lawyer anymore, but I'm just guessing.
Okay. I mean, it's an interesting question, because, I'm not estranged from my siblings. We're close. I have no idea what their business dealings are. I'm not sure they'd tell me if I asked. Thank you.
You're welcome. So a public official is required, this is again all under Oregon law, to make an announcement of the nature of a conflict of interest each time the issue gives rise. And it needs to be made on each occasion, and each occasion has been determined to mean one time per meeting, not like every single time the subject comes up, me. So each time they're met with a conflict of interest, the nature must be disclosed. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the bylaw template and sort of its purpose in creating a bylaw template. When we took a look at the templates that came in after the call from May, they were all over the place. There were bylaw templates that were 2 pages. There were bylaws that were 30 pages. There were bylaws that were created by the group themselves. Some were it was just all over the place. And in thinking this through and doing some research, the template is meant to be a technical operating manual for an advisory board. The points included in it are to ensure relevant laws are followed, in this case, state law, relating to governance of advisory bodies for things such as quorums and voting, and to provide basic information about membership, meetings, and expectations. It is my opinion, my legal opinion, that the bylaws should be created by city staff and approved by either an elected or bureau director or designee. Members of the body and staff can recommend changes, but ultimately it is the elected or bureau director who should approve any changes. And the reason for this is to assure that the purpose initially set out for a board, an advisory board, doesn't go too far astray, so that there's someone there if the body would like to suggest doing something else, adding something else, changing a procedure, that there's someone who's aware that that change is being made. Those are sort of the legal issues that I have. I'm going to pass it along to my colleague Ashley. I'll push the buttons for you.
And I apologize, I do have to go, but I leave you in Commissioner Fritz's able hands.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm really excited to be here before you today. I really am grateful for your leadership on this issue and the opportunity to address you today. It's been my pleasure to work with the other panelists you see before you, and also members of your staff and others who are not up here today, many of whom serve on the Public Involvement Advisory Council, and they've been working on this as well. I want to just give a little bit of context very briefly, and then get into some points around why these documents, these products that are being brought to you are so important and will add value to the work that we're doing here together. I run, for those of you who don't know, I run a citywide community engagement program. There are three main components to that program, one of which is the Public Involvement Advisory Council, or PIAC. At the May session on the resolution that we're bringing reports to you about, we were very encouraged, PIAC was very encouraged to hear the enthusiasm here among all of you that PIAC would be engaged in this work, and PIAC has been involved. Another big piece of the program that I run is developing citywide public involvement policy and best practices tools to elevate our work and standardize our work across all of the bureaus across the city. In this work, the third bucket that takes up a lot of time, I do a lot of capacity building across the city, a lot of training and consultation with bureaus and groups of bureaus on issues. Just to share a couple of products that you may have seen come before you over the years, the Public Involvement Principles is a product out of PIAC and the program that we're all very proud of. Also, some of the Budget Advisory Committee standards came out of here. Comp Plan Chapter 2 language was a collaborative effort and came out of that program. And also the new Racial Equity Toolkit, which you have heard presentation on from the Office of Equity and Human Rights. My program is one of the co-authors of that tool, because we believe that community should be engaged in government decision-making and reform work, especially in equity matters. The whole premise of this program and this work, and really bringing people into advisory bodies, is the understanding that those who are most impacted by something should be at the table making decisions about it. And so really, it's important, I think, just to step back and get bird's eye view of what is the role of boards and commissions, advisory bodies. Why are they of added value to you in your work as you're making all of these important policy decisions? It's an opportunity after election to hear from constituencies about matters that are important and to work together to solve problems that are shared. In my role, my reason for providing that context of the role that I serve here at the city, I hear from so many people every day about the challenges that they face in coordinating and leading important public involvement work across everything that we do. And one of the big trends that I've seen over my 3 or so years here is just the need for more clarity, guidance, and structure as it relates to advisory bodies. PIAC has identified the need for this and is actually working on a number of things that will come before you, we're hoping in the spring, in the form of complementary recommendations that will dovetail with some of this. I want to give Oh, it's not projecting. Apologies. I want to I've been told to keep to 5 minutes, so I'm doing my best to do that. I want to just speak to some of the products that we've all collaboratively worked on and have brought forward to you for your consideration, and share some, I guess, some added context as to why they would be so helpful in improving this work. So this need for a standardized application, I think, is a pretty obvious case. Just as a point of history, ONI has served as sort of like the default clearinghouse for applications to all of our advisory bodies, boards, and commissions, except for those that are very specifically housed in bureaus to advise bureau directors and so forth. And that is presented as a challenge in that we don't have a dedicated FTE to manage that presently. And it's something that has come up at various points, some of which predate my time here and since I've been here. So I'm really excited about us hopefully adopting a standardized application and also getting to some of the FTE support needs that are present.
Can I just amplify that?
Yes.
The third from the last, be it further resolved of this resolution says, as part of our next budget process, the Office of Neighborhood Involvement will request adequate resources to ensure proper and timely implementation of these policies. So it's baked into here.
Yes.
And I just want to say that, yes, there are going to have to be resources invested to make this work, and that was a very important part of the draft resolution that the city's committing through the budget process. Well, you'll be requesting the resources, but presumably the city will look favorably on a reasonable request.
I certainly hope so, since I am assigned the person who will be responsible for developing an implementation plan and also executing it. So I hope you'll be favorable to our request for additional resources and FTE to move that work forward in the future.
So, Jamie, let me jump in as well. First of all, thank you for all the work that you've been doing, because it's been already too much for just one person. You've done an amazing job with it. Secondly, the intent on the standardized application is not meant to preclude additional information to be given via the bureaus to the specifics of whatever they're applying for. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding. At PIAC, which the Public Involvement Advisory Council, which I staff, we have a standardized application, and sometimes we'll ask additional questions of all applicants, and we're actually, so yes, it's okay to have a standardized or uniform one across the city, which is helpful in a lot of ways and important. It's also okay to have more subject matter or specific questions that are asked, as long as it's consistent across the board. I wanted to share the importance of bylaws template also. I get asked by a number of staff who support these bodies questions about bylaws, and it is so very helpful to have a template that brings us up into compliance with existing state law, and also addresses some of the other issues that have been addressed here today before my speaking, that are of value and will again improve and elevate this work. And I think it will clarify a lot of questions that people who are serving on these bodies have, so that's also very important. Another thing, the exit interviews template, so very important that we have something like that to offer people who are serving and giving of their good time, or their time, their goodwill, and their expertise, and we know sometimes that people have wonderful substantive feedback to provide, and there's been no feedback loop created that's more standardized or official, and so we wonder how much good information we're losing or missing as to why people are leaving, or potential improvements that could be made to the body and the work itself. So I'll stop there. Those are just some points in support of these wonderful products that we have. I mentioned just a couple minutes ago that I will be developing an implementation plan and executing it. I'll be working with my bureau leadership. SOOC is aware that we're being asked to do this, and we will be figuring this out together. We estimate that this implementation will take about 9 or so months, and we ask for some flexibility there, considering the FTE considerations that we just addressed. Also be working proactive.
You don't need permanent full-time staff.
No, they do.
We do. I've been asked to assume this in addition to my existing full-time, full plate responsibilities, and so I'm saying yes. And I'll be developing a plan with my bureau leadership, and we will be needing additional resources because we have.
But what happens once you're through through the bulk of this work of implementation.
Oh, what work would then that extra FTE need to do? Is that?
Are we talking one FTE?
One is my
Oh,
understanding.
okay, so we're
Yes.
talking one, okay.
Yes.
That's
And
different.
this is- no.
I hear staff plural. And
Oh,
that raises my
We would be grateful
cackles.
for one.
Okay.
This is the Saltzman line of inquiry on any issue where there's new FTE and there's the potential for mission creep. I think the point I want to make is that we have over 100 boards and commissions, and we may decide to prune that a little bit because we want to make sure we're getting the maximum impact. But those are commissions that have regular turnover, and that means new members that have to be trained. They have regular inquiries about, what they can and can't do. So there's a tremendous amount of work, and Judy is our legal resource, but we really need someone whose job it is to be the liaison, to do some of the training, to track all the disclosures and be the point of contact. And even that person, it seems to me, is more than a full-time job.
Thank you. The last thing I wanted to say is that we're working proactively and collaboratively with Judy Prosper at the City Attorney's Office. Judy did she's taken a number of leadership roles as it relates to this work and facilitated a couple of roundtables and has gathered wonderful substantive feedback from city staff who support these bodies. I'm aware of that feedback, and we are working together to anticipate other questions, concerns, and also be responsive to them. And especially as legal questions come up, I will be pulling Judy in. And then, you know my contact information, so if you have any additional questions, please do direct them to me, because I'm the point of contact for this. Thank you.
Ashley, thank you for your great work.
Thanks.
Kofi, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Kofi Desu from the Office of Equity and Human Rights. Commissioner Fritz, Commissioner Odali, Commissioner Salzman, Commissioner Fish, thank you all for setting a new vision for the city's engagement with Portlanders who are willing to provide advice on policies, programs, and practices. I had the honor to work closely with Ashley, Brian, Judy, Claire, Sonia, and Amira, and I'm forgetting one name, please, Jamie. And I want to highlight, is this working? I want to highlight a few points in this process from the perspective of the Office of Equity and Human Rights. The first point is about the uniform application for the advisory bodies. The application form is the first document that provides the mission of the body, the advisory role of the members, and the expectations. Although the mission of each body will be different, the uniform application will allow the city to be consistent in the process and the data that will be generated, such as demographics. At the Office of Equity and Human Rights, we believe that it's important that city advisory bodies reflect the demographics of Portlanders. You know well that the city has been providing funding to train community leaders through the Civic and Leadership Program.
You're a little too close to the mic there.
Sorry.
There you go.
So, and community organizations have been training leaders and encouraging them to serve on, government bodies. And this is going to be helpful for them. The second point is about the exit interviews. Members of our advisory bodies live with a variety of experiences. That will be a total loss if we don't have a collection system in place. The exit interview will provide rich data based on experiences, including the accomplishments, the challenges, and the areas that need improvement. The third point is the establishment of standardized template of bylaws. This structure will save time for advisory bodies to focus on the analysis and advisory role they signed up for. The city-generated bylaws allow the city council to lead the vision and the mission of the advisory bodies while remaining open to recommendations from community members. The city-created bylaws also help the bureau director and the city officials to take ownership of the structures put in place to support the advisory bodies. From the perspective of the Office of Equity and Human Rights, I want to express my gratitude for establishing these structures. I believe if the city provides the necessary funding, the management of the advisory bodies will be more effective. Finally, the new standardized bylaws provide some flexibility that validate the great work that my colleagues Nicole Chiron and Tatiana Elejalde have accomplished to restructure the Portland Commission on Disability and the Human Rights Commission. These two commissions have removed the positions of chair and vice chair, and they are being more productive than ever before. They have established a new steering committee formats, and they are more empowering for all members. We encourage everyone to continue the conversation about the importance of inclusive city advisory bodies. We are grateful for your new vision, and we look forward to continue to improve city policies, processes, and practices. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Madam Chair, do you have a second amendment you'd like to offer at this point?
I do, and we can maybe have them both on the table at the same time. This is an amendment to Commissioner Udaley's amendment on recusal. And
I'll second it for discussion, if you could explain it.
Ms. Prosper brought to our attention, and so have other speakers, that there is city code already in ethics law. And so my amendment, Commissioner Udaley's, which I also support, is when the conflict of interest could result in a direct financial benefit to themselves or relatives, as defined in state law, a public official shall refrain from voting on the issue. The end of that sentence for Commissioner Udaley is, although discussion and participation is still allowed. I'm recommending that we change it to, and may not participate in the discussion prior to a vote. And that's because under in Exhibit B on page 11, this is the existing city code. It says under objectivity, if an individual official's financial or personal interest will be specifically affected by a decision, the official is to withdraw from participating in the decision. And we've actually had something that came to council last year, or actually over the last term, where a member of the design commission was the applicant and yet participated in the discussion even though he didn't participate in the vote, is I believe that what happened.
So, Madam President, may I make a suggestion? We have 10 people who signed up.
Yep.
Judy is doing heroic service today. She doesn't feel great.
Yeah.
But she is available to walk us through the legal issues, because we now have 3 different proposals. We have the current proposal, which is state law governs, Commissioner Udaley's proposal, which has a recusal component, and Commissioner Fritz's proposal, which has a recusal with a prohibition on participation. And they have different legal significance. May I suggest, because of the hour, that we defer on getting a legal analysis. We've heard the public testimony. Let's take the temperature of the room and then have the panel come back, give us some legal guidance, and then see where we are as a council.
Yeah, that sounds, if that's okay with everybody else. Potentially, we could even hear testimony and then carry things over so that the mayor can come back and participate.
On this issue, the mayor had expressed an interest in participating, but I have a couple of suggestions how we can slice that too.
Okay, let's do that.
Judy, can you hang out for another half an hour? You're getting, what is this? There must be some supplemental pay for hardship. So we have 10 people who've signed up.
Are you ready?
Yes, thank you. Please read.
Okay, the first 3 are Tracy Prince, Terry Parker, and John Hollister. I don't know if he's still here. Let's go ahead and go with Mark Velke. then.
And John Hollister asked me to read his testimony. I don't know if you guys are okay with that.
I'm fine. I mean, considering all of the changing around we've done, that would be fine. So you can have 3 minutes for yours and 3 minutes for his.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm Tracy Prince. I'm the Vice President of the Goose Hollow Foothills League. We care passionately about this issue, as you guys have heard repeatedly over the years. We're very proud that we have very strict ethical requirements, and a lot of what you've suggested today follows with our very strict ethical requirements for our board members. Thank you so much for this long overdue resolution. I really appreciate that all the committee emails are defined as public documents and that all committee members are understood to be public officials. I like that it's disclosing your conflict continuously. The term limits are absolutely important. We believe very strongly in that because we believe that that creates a strong citizenry who have ability to engage. That's why I'm not president, because we have term limits, and I'm really glad about that. I love the minority reports, which were so important on so many issues. I was really concerned before we entered today that it didn't seem like there was a definition of conflict of interest, but that has been resolved by some of the amendments. And the staff role in tracking the disclosures, which I hope is also made publicly available. The requirement to recuse, and we absolutely support the requirement that there is no discussion, because then you are able to influence people in a way that other people don't have access to, but you would be in a privileged position. I've been in meetings where people have voted to give themselves millions of dollars. It feels awful, because it feels unethical, because it is. And I've been very concerned that our laws haven't kept up with this. So I feel like this is so crucial because we should not be participating in such an unethical situation. Bad things happen when committee members focus mostly on their own profits rather than the public good. Rich developers will still vote to give themselves millions unless we have these rules in place, as they did on the West Quadrant SAC, as they did on the RIP SAC. Their votes to enrich themselves threaten hundreds of historic buildings and privatize iconic views at Salmon Springs and to and from the Vista Bridge. And I think that people should be focusing on what's best for all of Portland and not just what will make them the most financially. I have a couple of suggestions to strengthen this resolution. Number one, there need to be consequences. Right now, I believe it's an over $1,000 fine to litter your cigarette. So we should at least have a consequence that, maybe you can build it in a way that is both carrots and sticks, because there are ways to get compliance, but I feel like there must be consequences. And there needs to be a reporting mechanism for the general public so that when people, for example, saw the West Quadrant SAC members voting in their own financial interest, what mechanism would exist in order for the general public to weigh in on that? Thank you. And I've been asked by John Hollister to...
Let's do Mr. Parker's first, and then it's John's turn.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Terry Parker. I'm a fourth-generation Portlander that's lived in the Rose City Park neighborhood most of my life. Frequently, I have labeled many of Portland's citizens advisory committees as stacked decks, with the majority of seats at the table representing special interest agendas. A recent example of this trend was the Residential Infill Project Stakeholder Advisory Committee, organized under the auspices of then-Mayor Charlie Hales. This committee was heavily weighted with developer interests. The broad range of community interests were underrepresented. The committee embarked on a direction with end results that distinctly reflected developer objectives. Some of the comp plan stakeholder advisory committees also had a tendency to be slanted as to their focus and perspective. Where stacking the deck predominantly runs rampant is when it involves transportation issues. Although the citizen involvement may be equitably diverse as it relates to race and gender, stacking the deck has been all about fostering social engineering. No way does this represent an accurate makeup of the means by which the majority of people move about in Portland. Equity is discriminately absent as it relates to travel mode, where there are usually one or more seats at the table for all alternative modes. And while 75 to 80% of the trips in Portland are made by utilizing a car or truck, Most, if not all, PBOT committees are entirely deficient of specific representation for drivers who, through the gas tax, are the primary financial stakeholders for all transportation system projects. At the Planning and Sustainability Commission, one of the commissioners has a well-known reputation as one of the most vociferous car haters in the city. There is a multiplicity of types of equity. What other sector of city government wholly rebuffs and snubs physical stakeholder equity and representation? Citizen advisory bodies need to proportionally reflect the makeup of the community. At PBOT, that must include seats at the table that proportionately reflect the mode split, thereby including transport, tax-paying, stakeholder motorists as opposed to just beneficiary non-tax mode representation. I support the intent of this resolution to clearly define transparency and accountability of city advisory bodies. What still made some work is to include language that requires all types of equity. And based on something that Commissioner Udaley said earlier, I think there needs to be a limit on the number of bodies that any one individual can serve on at the same time. That will give more openings to the public. Thank you.
If you'd like to read Mr. Hollister's, please, Dr. Prince.
John Hollister asked me to read this, that he had to leave to attend a Prosper Portland meeting for the unreinforced masonry seismic upgrades. He looks forward to talking to you in the future about what seems to be a pattern on the advisory committees that he had dealt with. The things he's concerned with are the lack of committee transparency, the potential conflicts of interest by committee members, and the lack of public representation on committees. And by this, he said that he wants to see residents considered primary stakeholders, that right now the planning staff and other staff members in other bureaus determine that the stakeholders are the people who have the most at stake financially. And land use rule number 1 requires citizen participation. It doesn't require giving the best access to the richest people. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Belkey,
So
thank
can I
you.
ask a question, Terry and Tracy? How long have you been on the, I know you're on the Rosewood Neighborhood Board for a long time. How long have you been on the Goose Hollow Board?
5 years.
5 years? Okay.
well,
Does your board
this-
have term limits itself?
Oh, yeah, so
Board
I
membership?
did
Okay.
3 before, and then I'm on my, 2 before on my second 3. I did a big break in the middle, so. And we have term limits. You cannot not serve more than 6 years on the neighborhood association. You cannot serve more than 2 years in executive position.
Okay. Does Rose City Park have similar?
Rose City Park doesn't have term limits, but we allow 25 board members, and I think we only have 16 now, so there's various openings. And if we got up to 25 and somebody really wanted to be on the board, we could probably accommodate that. I mean, there's no, as I say, there's no term
I guess
limits.
I'm wondering, through this discussion, and maybe it's just a simple question, but does any of this that we're talking about apply to neighborhood organizations in terms of
I wish it
term
would.
limits? So, yeah,
I
you would-
wish all the conflicts of interest would apply to all business associations and neighborhood associations.
But this
That'd be wonderful.
proposal, I'm looking at Ms. Prosper, and she says
One
no,
of the
it
things I
doesn't.
will say about neighborhood associations, if you get very involved, there's an awful lot of work.
Right, yeah.
I mean, you can spend 40 or 50
Yeah, and
hours
it's
a
often
month.
thankless work,
Not
yeah.
everybody wants to do that.
Right, right.
So we often hear some arguments against having term limits. Oh, there's nobody else to do the work.
Right.
But inevitably, when we have 2 board positions to fill right now, and I thought, oh my gosh, who will we get? But the more you knock on doors and the more you say, you know, hey, we need some more people, you find them. And so I believe that when there are no term limits, it leads to sort of mini dictatorships, and the will of the people isn't reflected.
Thank you. Mr. Belkey, thank you. It's your turn.
So I guess I'll just leave it at, maybe we should include those organizations in this resolution.
Well, that would be
well,
very far-reaching.
I want to cut this off.
Sorry.
We'll get back to that later.
Madam President, I do have a comment and a response to Ms. Prinz. Neighborhood associations are independent bodies, and the city doesn't dictate what their bylaws are. So we could certainly make suggestions, but we're not exactly the boss of them. And as to your concerns about enforcing the standards like recusal. I wanted to let you know that there is language that states that a person serves at the discretion of the commissioner or bureau director in charge. If staff tells us that a person serving on a public body is refusing to recuse themselves, they could be asked to leave. But beyond that, it does make sense to me that an enforcement process would be developed as part of the best practices for retention and recruitment.
Thank you so much for pointing that out, and I think that's a good change, that the commissioners should have oversight over the people serving and that there shouldn't be this unlimited thing. On the neighborhood association issue, I know we want to move on, but you actually could say, and business associations, you actually could say, you will not receive city funding if you do not have a strict conflict of interest obligation. I'm telling you that because in our neighborhood association, we had to vote people out who were clearly stacking the board and trying to vote on their own financial interest rather than what was good for the whole neighborhood.
Dr. Prince, let me just
I will look into that.
I just want to say something. Commissioner Udaley just used an expression that brought back a flood of memories, because I remember the first time my now 13-year-old son, but I think it was when he was about 8, he said, "You are not the boss of me." By that he meant, I take orders from Mom, not from you. So we had to have a little conversation. This question about whether we should have a similar set of guidelines and restrictions that apply to neighborhood associations and business associations, I'm certainly open to that conversation. There's a different legal architecture. I think in fairness, if we decide to do that, we should take it, this is a resolution today, we should take it up as a separate matter, because
Totally.
I would want to give the affected bodies a chance to weigh in on it. But I'm personally agnostic in terms of having that discussion. And if that's something that a colleague or two think is worthy of pursuing, I would suggest that being a complementary piece we do later.
So, and I'm not suggesting that anyone's right to free speech is suppressed. They're always welcome to advocate for themselves, but not on the city dime. That's it.
Thank you.
One
Mr. Belkey,
more.
no, I
No,
really
we
need to
gotta
kick
go.
off this
One more
conversation.
comment
we
I
gotta
might
go
make
on.
about the neighborhood association.
No, actually, Mr. Parker, no.
I think the membership
No,
can override
I would
the
like you
board at
to
any
please be
time.
quiet so that we can get on with testimony. Thank you.
Commissioners, my name is Mark Belkey, and I live in the Goose Hollow area where I serve on the Goose Hollow Foothills League Neighborhood Association. I would like to thank Commissioners Fish and Fritz. Oh, I thought it was a green light. And Udaley for bringing this resolution forward. It is a great step in the right direction, and I would hope that everyone else will also support it. I was very glad, as were many others, to hear Mayor Wheeler say these two things at the February 2016 Northwest Examiner Candidate Forum. His first quote was, "To find out afterwards that an advisory committee was loaded or potentially stacked with people who have their own vested interests, that just should not be allowed to happen." And his second quote is, "What we found with the West Quadrant Stakeholder Advisory Committee was someone could have a direct conflict of interest. They could personally, financially benefit from the recommendations being made by that committee to City Council, and yet the auditor found under the ethics law that they cannot actually have a direct conflict of interest. That's goofy to me." I agree with what the mayor said, and council should also add the changes that Dr. Prince suggested so that this resolution can be even better. And I also think that the amendments that you are considering are all very good, particularly the last one from Commissioner Fritz. I do feel that this resolution can be tightened up and strengthened to make it even better, so please do that. One thing I was a little confused on, I only had time to read the 31-page resolution once, and so far anyway, but it seems like the thing about type 3 committees and commissions, the rules seem that they had a lot of loopholes in there. So I think type 3 should be, have more rigorous requirements. I'm not an expert on that, but it just seems there's something wrong there, so I really wish if someone could look into that. So anyway, that's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, please.
All right, Daniel Solomon, Mary Sipe, and Robert Wright.
Mr. Sullivan, I believe you're first.
Oh, you want me to go first? Sure. My name is Daniel Salomon. I'm a Section 8 renter in the Central City. I couldn't believe that it was legal for West Quadrant Stockholder Advisory Committee members to vote to give themselves millions of dollars by raising heights on their own properties. I think they would spend a lot of time in jail if they did that in other states. It sounds like the mafia to me, but apparently this has been Portland's normal way of doing business for decades. It's easy to see why the Center for Public Integrity gave Oregon as an F rating in ethics. Thanks, but I do want to say thanks for taking these amazing steps towards ethical government by requiring disclosures. Please vote for Commissioner Fish's amendment to make it illegal for committee members to vote to give themselves millions of dollars by voting on their own financial interests. Recent statistics show that Portlanders have a dramatic decline in their trust of local government. This is why. Voters don't like it when you allow rich developers to vote to give themselves millions of dollars as they did on the West Quadrant plan. This makes us distrust Portland's government and distrust our elected leaders. Requiring recusal goes beyond state ethics laws, but Portland often leads the way with progressive laws with the state. And I also want to say it was not just with the West Quadrant plan, but also RIPSAC. But again, I want to thank you for helping raise Oregon ethics ratings from an F. We got into this situation because city staff members believe that rich developers are the main stakeholders, not Portland's residents. If this resolution doesn't have a statement that residents are the primary stakeholders, then staff will still continue to think of stakeholders as those who have the most at stake financially. This violates land use goal number 1, which requires citizens' participation, not just the richest citizens. We residents are the stakeholders who mattered most. I'm a Section 8 renter. I'd like to know that my voice will be heard and that a rich developer doesn't have better access than I have to shaping city policies. Thank you for this wonderful resolution.
Thank you. Ms. Sipe?
Hi, Mary Sipe. I just want to say one thing. The standard application I think is a really great idea, but I'd also like to see something else standardized, and that is how announcements for vacant board positions are made. There does not seem to be any consistency in that. Recently, with a board that I've been very involved with over the last 3 years, earlier this year had a board vacancy. And there was no announcement of it. Apparently, they just took a qualified person from the last round and appointed them. And I think that's leaves for some kind of stacking of the deck. And I'd like to see perhaps you also address some consistency and standardization, that any time there's a vacancy on any of these boards, that be publicized and a whole new application process is undertaken. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, half my time.
Mr. Wright.
Oh, thank you. My name is Robert Wright. I'm a proud native of Portland, and I've lived in the West End for over 11 years. Commissioner Fish, Commissioner Udaley, Commissioner Fritz, thank you very much for your leadership to strengthen the transparency and accountability of city advisory bodies, and by direct extension, that of city government. Weakness in these fundamental pillars of good governance were identified and confirmed in the Central City 2035 planning process, but could have occurred in other advisory bodies. The public's trust in government from federal through the city levels is at low ebb across the nation. Portland must shed the weight of conflicts of interest, favoritism, hidden agenda, and the perception of good old boy decision-making. Report and recuse must be the backbone of your proposed resolution. Reporting financial interests and recusal from voting on recommendations that may impact those interests. The proposed resolution had, according to amendments, a chink in its armor. recusal from voting. As drafted, members could vote on recommendations that pose actual or potential conflicts of interest. Such voting must absolutely be prohibited and codified in Exhibit D under General Operating Procedures, with the proviso that the entire vote on a recommendation will be null and void if later determined that interest-conflicted voting had taken place. Again, thank you for your hard work on this very important matter.
Thank you for your patience in waiting to testify. Next ones, please.
The last two I show are Margaret Noel and Roger Leachman.
Good afternoon. Thank you
Hello.
for staying. Ms. Noel, would you like to go first, please?
Yes, Commissioners, thank you for letting me testify. For the record, I'm Margaret Knoll. I'm representing the League of Women Voters of Portland. The League approves of many of the recommendations that were developed to improve transparency and accountability in city advisory bodies. However, we urge you to consider some changes to the bylaws template. First, we believe that mandating term limits is a poor policy. We value the contributions of the experienced members who understand the complex issues advisory groups consider, as well as the fresh ideas offered by new members. Both viewpoints are needed. We believe that each group should have the flexibility to shape its own policies on term limits. We strongly oppose mandatory 2-year breaks after 8 years of consecutive service. The selection process for members of the Citizen Review Committee is an example of one way to foster diversity and fresh perspectives, but retain expertise in a group without term limits. CRC members serve staggered terms of 3 years, at which time they must reapply and be reappointed or replaced. The decision depends on which appointments will cause the CRC to best reflect the makeup of the community. CRC members are replaced if there is another nominee whose participation would improve the diversity of the CRC. We recommend that the uniform bylaws template should offer other advisory bodies the ability to adopt a process like this. Regarding disclosures of conflict of interest, we certainly agree that financial conflicts must be disclosed. However, we also believe that such conflicts of interest should not require recusal. Because the advisory bodies do not make the final decisions, they are not the decision makers. Instead, we recommend adding to the bylaws template a requirement that all formal correspondence from an advisory body should include, as an attachment, the names, affiliations, and other connections of all the members of the advisory group, and a record of how each of these members voted on any recommendations. Information on the backgrounds and interests of all members as entered in their applications should be public. Although this information may be included in the group's minutes and other records, it would be easier for commissioners and the public to find it if it is sent with the group's recommendation. And incidentally, I totally agree with the idea that these groups should be balanced. They should include a lot of public involvement, and that they need to have citizens who live in the community, who volunteer in the community represented. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Leachman, you have the last word.
Commissioners, my name is Roger Leachman. I am resident on Southwest Vista, and I serve on the board of the Goose Hollow Foothills League. I think it is salutary to consider why we are here and why this matter is before council. A little over 2 years ago, a group of ordinary citizens resident in Goose Hollow, the Pearl, the Northwest District, and downtown filed an ethics complaint with the Ombudsman. I don't need to rehearse that history to you. You know it. They were undoubtedly whistleblowers. Sometimes, certainly not always, whistleblowing results in actions to address the concerns raised. Accordingly, I too was heartened over a year ago by the mayor's remarks at the candidates forum, which Mark Velke has quoted to you. And I am more pleased than I can say that you are moving forward. But it is important to say that the actions contemplated here derive from grassroots action by citizens, abetted by one courageous journalist, and it would not otherwise be happening. A very American story. Whistleblowing and citizen advocacy have their hazards, ranging from character assassination to reprisals and lawsuits. The former is the first line of attack, as it is the first symptom of the kill the messenger syndrome. It's on display in the op-ed by Neighbors West Northwest President Felicia Williams in yesterday's Tribune. Both the citizen group and my own neighborhood association are denigrated. We're now used to that in Goose Hollow, as we have many pages of the like from her going back a long time. You probably want to pass on going through those, and it would be tedious. So I presume that you can see beyond an attempt like this to marginalize Portland citizens and their advocacy. And I'm sure you will, and I'm sure the general citizens of Portland see through it. There's a famous phrase that I encountered as an undergraduate in the civil rights movement decades ago. It became the title of a PBS series. Keep your eyes on the prize. Do that. This prize is ensuring robust ethical standards, accountability, and transparency, and thereby restoring trust in city processes, which had been strained to the breaking point. I second Tracy's testimony and there's little point in repeating it since it's on record now. If you heed her suggestions, you will make all the work you've done, and I applaud the commissioners for that work, move us further along the path to the prize. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, we're going to close public testimony. And
So I have a suggestion, Madam President, and thank you for all the testimony. First of all, I have run out of gas, so I have to just tell you that in a few minutes I have to head home. It's been a very long day and actually an outstanding day. Number two, the mayor would like to be heard on the question of recusal. It's a significant policy question. Number three, we now have on the question of recusal 3 distinct proposals before the council. One is reflected in the resolution, which tracks state law. A second is reflected in Commissioner Udaley's amendment, which would mandate recusal. And the third is represented in Commissioner Fritz's amendment, which would go further and prohibit participation. I came into this hearing with an open mind about where I would land. And I found the testimony quite compelling. And I can't tell you right now where I'm going to land, but what I would benefit from is the chance to meet with Judy when she's healthy and to go over just the legal landscape so I understand the intended and unintended consequences. I want to better understand the concern raised by the League of Women Voters, who in their testimony have said they do not support going beyond state law. I want to understand why and how they get to that point. And so my suggestion, if it's acceptable to the council, is that we vote on Fritz 1, Fish 1, and Fish 2, and then adopt the resolution as amended, with the proviso that in 3 weeks, a resolution will come to council with a recusal proposal for discussion and debate. And as early as 3 weeks, it's whatever the will of the council, at which case we could take up as a separate resolution that question and just decide it and have the benefit of the briefings on the interim so that the council, a full council, could decide that question, and we have 3 distinct choices. So that's my proposal.
Thank you, Commissioner. We just, before everybody gets packed up, we have one more item left on the regular agenda, which is an emergency item. So I would ask you not to pack up quite as quickly, but it'll only take 5 minutes.
I guess I would echo what Commissioner Fish just suggested, but I guess I would like to go further and say that I'd like some more time to think about the term limit question in light of the league's testimony.
Well, the resolution that could be brought back to council could be amended by anyone at that hearing. So my intent would to bring a clean recusal resolution to council and then allow the council to deliberate that if any amendment would be in order. And you know, for me, my preference would be in 3 weeks, because that's one of my golden weeks, and the next would be 6 weeks, but it's up to the council. But I see no reason why we couldn't bring it back in 3 weeks and have it even a time certain. Adopt everything else today, because a lot of hard work has gone into it, and then make sure the council is clear about the alternatives when we come back, and it just address recusal, which I think is a compelling issue that needs us to address.
And is everybody else comfortable voting on Fritz 1 and Fish 1 and 2?
Yes.
Okay, so please call the roll on Fritz 1, which is about minority reports.
Udaly?
Aye.
Fish?
I think it's a terrific amendment. Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye, thank you. Please call the roll on Fish 1, which is,
The restrictions on talking to the press.
right, deleting those.
Udaly?
Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
And Fish 2 has to do with something that was suggested by Dr. Prince about keeping records of recusals.
And however we end up on the actual policy, we would certainly want the record to be kept, so I think that's fairly non-controversial. If you could call the roll on Fish 2, please.
Udaly?
Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
So I move the resolution.
Let's, if I might suggest that we just move it over for 3 weeks rather than passing something that we are going to amend.
Yeah.
That's fine.
The mayor's gone in 3 weeks. That's the,
Or maybe 4 weeks?
5?
5?
the 1st of November or the 8th of November. I show everybody in right now.
I'm just,
Perhaps-
if it's
perhaps
5,
since we've closed public testimony, I don't think we do need to put it as a time certain, so let's have our schedulers look at that.
the one, if we did adopt the I see, but if we did adopt the resolution today, staff could start working on the various pieces, and we have clearly signaled that the question of recusal is an open question. And I would think, just to honor all the hard work, if we adopt the resolution with an understanding that we will take up recusal as a freestanding issue.
Colleagues, Commissioner Daly? Yeah?
And if I check with
I'd
legal
prefer to wait.
counsel.
I'd prefer to wait.
Well, then-
I don't see the harm. I mean, like I said, there was some good testimony from the League One voters. I'd like some more time to ponder what they said and the context of my final vote on the resolution. So, yeah, I want some more time.
And I think it's fairly clear to staff who are here and to everybody what points we have concerns about and what points we don't. So that doesn't, unless you have other comment, Commissioner Daly, since it's currently the Office of Neighbourhood Involvement.
I mean, it's just that it would be nice to get going on this. It's a long time coming, and it's a lot of work.
Well, staff, I think, I think staff is now clear we're going to move forward with this. If we could have this come back in 4 weeks,
As a time certain?
or doesn't have to be a time
I
certain.
think it doesn't need to
Okay.
be sensitive.
Yeah, everybody's here. That would be November 1st.
Okay.
Let's do that.
That work for you,
And
Commissioner
let's,
Fish?
carry it forward. Madam President, could we each take 1 minute just to make a comment, because we may lose some people?
Certainly, but do remember I need you to stay for the next item,
Oh, right, we've got one more item.
which is 11:02.
I'll stay.
Go ahead.
I just want to, because we're going to obviously lose some people, I want to thank all the members of the public who pushed this issue and helped shape this proposal. And I agree with the last person who testified about the power of grassroots advocacy. I want to thank all of the professional staff people who worked on this, particularly Judy Prosper, who is here not feeling well and who really has been indispensable in working this, but all the folks on our panel. I want to thank Amira Streeter and in particular and the rest of my team for the work they've put into it. And most especially, I want to thank all my colleagues. We do our best work when we engage the public as full partners. We do our best work as colleagues when we listen to each other and engage each other and try to reach consensus. And I'm very proud of a whole series of decisions this council has made in the last few months. It's an honor to serve on this council. So thank you, everybody who has brought us to this moment. And we have one final issue to resolve, and we have a clear roadmap of the different options. And I look forward to calling that question on November 1st. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. Commissioner Salzman? No comment?
I mean, I do have a closing statement, but it was assuming that we would be
Yeah.
passing it. So should I save it for later? I'm going to save it for later, but I do want to thank Judy and Brian Hoop and Ashley in particular for working so hard on this. And I will save the rest of my thank yous for November 1st, I guess. Yeah.
I would add my thanks to those that already spoke, also Claire Adamsick on my staff, and there's been some really good staff conversations on this issue. It's obviously dear to my heart, and I can't help comment that many of the people who yell at us about our public process are not here participating in the very difficult work of figuring out what that public process should be. So thank you to those who are, especially due to the late hour. With that, we will move, because we're not voting on anything else. Thank you very much. I hope you feel better soon, Ms. Prosper. 11:02 is the last item of the day. I hope you agree with that. Is that right,
That's what I've got. 11:02, authorize a 5-year price agreement with Relay Resources for janitorial services at multiple Portland parks and recreation locations for a contractual total not to exceed $5,495,216.
Thank you. I told staff from Parks that they did need to stay because it's very straightforward in the ordinance. This clean, welcoming facilities are an essential part of Portland Parks and Recreation's ability to provide exemplary customer service and employee working conditions. By Oregon state law, if Portland Parks and Recreation chooses to contract for janitorial services, the Bureau must award a contract to a qualified rehabilitation facility. Qualified rehabilitation facility organizations provide disabled individuals, people with disabilities or experiencing disabilities, with opportunities to achieve personal independence through productive, gainful employment. Using the Department of Administrative Services established procedure for requesting proposals from and selecting a qualified rehabilitation facility firm, Portland Parks and Recreation has selected Relay Resources, formerly known as Portland Habilitation Center Northwest, to provide janitorial services for multiple sites, including community centers, offices, and maintenance facilities. Does anybody have any questions on that from the council?
Move this by acclamation.
Does anybody want to testify on this?
No one signed up.
All these organizations.
Seeing none, let's please vote on it.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Fritz?
Thank you to all my colleagues. Thank you to the City Attorney. Thank you to the Council Clerk. This has been a very long day, but we got through it. Aye.
Thank you, Madam President.
I love Madam President. I love Madam President.
What should I call them?